Welcome to the one-off show of talking about Frank Miller's Ronin. I am Dan with Karl Altstaetter, comic artist and toy designer now. This was something that we kind of came up with because this is a book we both haven't read in a long time, and I feel it's one of the overlooked books in Frank's catalog.
Absolutely.
There was interesting. The version I have had a introduction by Jeanette Kahn, who was the editor-in-chief at the time with Paul Levitz. And they talk about what went into making this book. And I found it interesting because she just scheduled a lunch with Frank. Frank was still with Marvel at the time. And he had been watching a bunch of the Yojimbo Samurai Trilogy books, Zatoichi, the Blind Swordsman films. And he wanted to do a book about Ronin Samurai. And Jeanette had also kind of fallen into watching those movies. And he had a couple of demands. He wanted to do it on high-quality paper, which at the time was not a thing. The Baxter editions, I think Teen Titans and Camelot 3000.
Yeah, I don't even think those were out yet. I don't think Teen Titans
Camelot was the only one.
Yeah, Camelot was, yeah. But I mean, I had also heard that originally he had spoken to Marvel about doing it with what would be like their Epic line.
Yes, but they were willing to give him more freedom, and the big sticking point was he wanted to have it trademarked under his name.
Oh.
Which Marvel back then was not going to do.
Right.
It wasn't in their practice, and even DC, Paul Levitz had to fight because getting Frank Miller to DC was such a huge deal at the time.
I'm sure.
This was 1983, 1984, and this was after the Daredevil run.
Yeah.
So that was a huge get for them.
Which is it's interesting to me. Well, no, keep going because there's a few different things that come to mind just from what you're talking about. But go ahead.
So he wanted the books to have a spine like an actual novel, which they were not able to do. There was a lot of hemming and hawing about the trademark. Paul Levitz actually went to the carpet for him. He got the trademark, which probably is why this hasn't been made into a movie because DC wouldn't get the money.
Right.
I mean, let's be honest. Like Watchmen probably only got made because DC fucked Alan Moore over on it. Alan Moore signed a contract that he really didn't think was ever going to play out the way it did.
Yeah, I also think that there at that time he'd written a graphic novel speaking about Watchmen that he said many times he thought was unfilmable. And if you think that by 1984, 85 standards, was it 85 or 86? I'm not sure.
85, 86. I think it started in 85, but there was pushback on the schedule.
Yeah, I mean, there was I could understand people or creators thinking there's no way they can make a movie of this.
Well, he never thought it would be reprinted so many times either. It had to fall out of print for, I think, 3 or 4 years, and he got the rights.
Cut to Zack Snyder at like 14, and he's like...
Yeah. So he was not able to get the library binding.
Yeah, which they called square bound, and that whole
format, was it Baxter format, or Baxter was what Teen Titans was printed on, I think.
Yeah, I think Baxter's the name of the paper, the style of paper, right? But that square bound kind of they, when they were able to do it on Dark Knight, that became known as Dark Knight format, right?
And Dark Knight, they said later he got that for Dark Knight.
Right. And then that later became known as Prestige format, right?
Yes.
And then now I don't even know what it's called.
Elseworlds were printed on that. I also think Killing Joke was also the Prestige format.
Green Arrow, Longbow Hunters, that kind of came out right after.
Longbow Hunters was so good. That's another one that I could go on about. For Mike Grell, I think he's kind of underappreciated as an artist. I don't think enough people really know of Mike Grell. Like, if you know, but like the casual reader, Mike Grell's been kind of out of it for so long.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely don't hear about people speaking of him in the way that I think his work deserves.
Bart Sears also.
Yeah, I also kind of feel that way a little bit about Steve Rude. Like, he's a genius.
Yes.
And he doesn't get that same level of, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that they didn't do long runs, really. You know, if Mike Grell had done
But I could also say the Hernandez brothers for Love and Rockets, for as long as they did that book, like I don't think they get the respect they deserve.
I don't think they do now, but during the time, I think Love and Rockets was, you know, it was discerning comic fans, you know, people who were really into comic books knew about it and it was beloved. I think because it sort of had its run, it's been reprinted, of course, but it doesn't have nearly. I mean, if it was coming out today, it would totally come out through Image. It would be like a huge hit because it hits a lot of those marks that even work now, you know.
But I feel Terry
Kind of
Moore is the spiritual successor of the Hernandez brothers with putting out indie books that
that's
hit a
interesting.
certain subsection.
Yeah, I never thought about that, but that does kind of sound true. You know, the Hernandez brothers, I think they were just, you know, anytime you read any of that stuff, it's so humanistic, and that wasn't really what was happening in a lot of comics during that time. So it just
No,
created a
no,
really great, you know,
it was very subversive for its time,
yeah,
even with their
absolutely,
LGBTQ characters. Like again, at that point in time, nobody except maybe Milestone, I think, at one point was
yeah.
having LGBTQ characters.
Yeah, and it was also it felt like they were living in that world, and then they were translating that world into the books. You know, the kind of punk rock, Latin kind of world that they grew up in. It was amazing.
Another thing about this book, and I don't think it'll be appreciated for 1983, 84. This was an outlier of a book. I really think some of these subjects, some of even the art style, I don't think was really expressed enough. Like Frank was kind of playing with his own style at the time, where he was doing painting. It was more of a cartoonistic approach, where
Yeah.
Daredevil, it was very in line with everything else. Of course, he's always been good with working in space. Like the way he used the space on the page was always very impressive.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about it is this was when you were really seeing a lot of Frank Miller's work without Klaus Janson. So you were
Yes.
seeing a lot of different styles of his. And if you really look through that book, the thing that always blows me away is that Frank Miller has always been great about evolving his work and kind of matching his current style to whatever he's writing. Like if you look at like something like Electra Lives, where it's just line art with heavy painting, and then you see Sin City, where it's this high contrast artwork. All those styles, all the Frank Miller styles that you've almost ever seen, even the Dark Knight style and this kind of Mobius style that he has in it, are all in this one book. And that's what's so amazing about it, is when you're reading it and you'll see one aspect of the story, he's doing a certain style, and then it cuts to another scene and it's really something different. And even throughout the whole process of the book, because I know there was a big time kind of wait between, I think, the fifth and the sixth issue, and you can really kind of see that his style sort of changing. But it's basically like the Frank Miller primer. It has all of his looks in one book.
It was interesting also because around this time, Bill Sienkiewicz also had kind of a interesting jump in his work where it became more expressionistic.
Yeah.
Because his stuff on New Mutants, especially the Demon Bear saga, was where it became this loose, where I would almost say like expressionistic art, where when he was on Moon Knight, it was completely different. Like where it was very shadowy and moody, it became this weird abstract art, which became his
Yeah.
calling card.
Yeah, that, you know, I think this, with all due respect to Bill Sienkiewicz, because he's a fantastic artist, but his Moon Knight run owed a lot to Neil Adams, and he was at the time was considered almost like a, you know, a Neil Adams clone, you know. And then he sort of began to bring like these Bob Peak elements. You know, Bob Peak, he's a great poster illustrator. He did the James Bond posters, Apocalypse Now poster. He's a fantastic artist, but he's really more of what at that time would have been called like a painterly illustrator. And you start to see a lot of that show up across the board during that time of the 80s. You started to see a big influence from what I would call like American illustrators. Like you'd see people doing elements of Line Decker's paintings, elements of Bob Peak. elements of Norman Rockwell, these kind of what were commercial illustrators from, 20, 30, it's the 80s. So it's like 40 years ago for some cases. Some of them were, 20 years ago.
I also think Jim Shooter gave them a little bit more artistic freedom because, like, you had John Romita Jr. on X-Men, where he had kind of like this dark, loose style that just seemed to work for what, in my opinion, was like a punk rock book at the time.
Yeah, I think a lot of that had to do with his pairing with Dan Green, because Dan Green had kind of an Al Williamson sort of look to his style. And I think that was really different than what we had seen John Romita do earlier in his career, where he was inked by Bob Layton, who's very tight, very Iron Man. They did that on Iron Man. And so John Romita Jr. up until that point hadn't really, I think, fully blown out his style. But then,
and I love that he wasn't aping his father also. Like,
yeah, I mean, I remember really first noticing him on the Iron Man books with Bob Layton, but Bob Layton is such a type of inker. He's like almost like Terry Austin, where he's inking the guy, right? And he's doing a little bit of the drawing too. But then when you started seeing John Romita Jr., like even in some of the Spider-Man stuff he'd done or really early, and then even the artwork in the Marvel Tryout book, you start to see that look that emerges, which becomes that look that you see in X-Men. And
well, it's weird when you see John Byrne without Terry Austin.
Yeah, I don't feel that's as different.
It's not different, but there is a distinct.
Yeah, it is a definite
notice. Like when you see it, you go, okay, Terry Austin inked that. Where when he was without Terry Austin, you're like it's not as tight.
I'm a John Byrne apologist. I love everything he's done. I mean, I remember buying a ROM cover with just Marina's head popping out of the water, and I was like, I've got to get it. It's John Byrne.
I loved ROM. Like that was one of those weird books that it was just so interesting because it was so different from everything in the Marvel line. And just for anybody listening, I guess you could say we're Frank Miller apologists. I know Frank Miller has been a lightning rod for a lot of good and a lot of bad. He did have some substance abuse issues and some health issues for a while, and he said some wild shit at some times.
Right.
But we're here to talk about this book, its influences, and I think I'm at a point where I can separate the artist from the work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my thing is I sort of interface with the artwork as it is, and I mean, I have a lot of respect. I'm a huge fan of Frank Miller, but when I read Ronin, it almost transports me back to the time when I first read it. But interestingly enough, reading it this time, there were a lot of things I noticed from who I am today versus who I was when I read it when I was younger. And over the years, I've looked at it a lot, but I haven't fully sat down and read it until we were setting up for this. And it's interesting how much it's a thing that's of that time, but actually it's very much ahead of its time.
Very much so. And I think the storytelling in an interesting way subverts. As for Steven's comment here, it's been 30 years since I read Ronin last. So there's things that I didn't think about for a long time. And now seeing how it worked with modern media, like Samurai Jack's creator 100% said that this influenced him.
Yeah, how could you not say that though? I mean, it's really like the whole story. I mean, Ronin is a much has a kind of some subtler layers in it, but it definitely, when you watch Samurai Jack, if you knew Ronin, you would definitely be able to draw the lines.
I see a little 2001 influence in this.
I see a huge 2001.
Yes.
The other big influence.
Mother from Alien.
Yeah, but also John Carpenter. John Carpenter, all of his work, Escape from New York, it has that vibe to it. You know what I mean? With the New York that they show. And then the fact that an interesting thing that he keeps doing is he has these characters in multiple places. Some of them are inside, the kind of machinery element, and then other people are outside. Some are in Aquarius, some are outside. But he every issue he shows you a picture of New York,
Yes.
just to ground you back. And then he also shows you a picture of Aquarius growing. So although he doesn't really specifically show you where they are, he almost gives you this global idea. Like, you see this freaky machine that's going crazy growing, they're somewhere in there. And then he's like, you see this blown out, desolate looking New York, they're somewhere in there.
When you read it this time, did you start seeing the artistic seeds of what was to come?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was
Dark
mentioning.
Knight in particular, I really saw like he was laying seeds in here that he took certain elements for.
Yeah, especially I thought in terms, well, two things. One, like I said, the Electra Live style, where it's just almost like line art that's painted, and then the high contrast artwork, like when the Ronin is using the telekinetic powers, he would blow the characters out, and they would be like high contrast, and then some of the film type stuff that he was using. I mean, there's like every idea. It feels like every other idea that you've seen him do later in his career, he took a shot at it here. Almost like a testing ground for a lot of his style.
This is also one of the few books I've seen more fucking thesis statements on than any other book, where people are like, well, this is him taking a shot at the state of modern comics, and they're explaining the ending to a degree. And I'm like, I don't think that's what he's going for here, but definitely in that issue of Spawn he wrote, where he showed all the creators' creations in jails in hell.
Yeah.
100% that is him talking about creator owned versus working for the modern machine.
Yeah, something that I noticed with it this time is, and he's made lots of comments about it before, about the idea of comic books representing like a power fantasy. And in this, it is literally, and spoiler alert, it's about the power
100%.
fantasy of one of the characters. I don't want to spoil it too much if someone hasn't read it, but it's like he has someone who has the power to make their power fantasy a reality. And then it's like
Didn't know they had the power.
right. And then in the end, I mean, the ending itself is almost
indifferent.
Right.
Yeah, I would say it's almost like The Thing, where you have to draw your own ending.
Right.
Where the John Carpenter vibes that you were talking about are very present in here.
Yeah, because it just sort of leaves you with like, you as an audience member can figure out how you want to interact with that ending. And that's what's really so different than so many comics that were made during that time, but also all the comics he would make later. He's trusting in you as a reader to follow it through to the end, and then at the end he leaves you with a sort of an interaction, which is, hey, now you have an opportunity to figure out what you think happened.
Which
what
I would also say, like, this gets buried because of Year One and Dark Knight, where people forget this came out before both of those.
Yeah, it's amazing that the era that it came out with, that he was it's such a disruptive piece. When you think about all the other comic books that were coming out during that time, the fact that he would come out with a quote unquote creator owned comic book that was so edgy, especially for the period of time, but also so experimental. And man, I'm telling you, there are times where it borders on self-indulgent, but it never quite goes there. I feel like he does some stuff with the imagery where you go, wow, it still stuns you. You'll turn the page and you're like, wow, that's a great shot.
So the end of issue 1 in particular had an image that was used on every solicitation in 1983 in the
right,
books.
right.
And I had posted on Instagram, and like literally it was like daring the reader, like, hey, you might want to go check this out.
Yeah. To me, the first issue is almost a perfect first issue, because it sets up the world, sets up all the main characters, and then leaves you thinking like, what is going to happen next? And a first issue is really difficult to pull off. So to see him do it in this way, where he cuts, a lot of the things that he's doing, where you're cutting back and forth, are very cinematic things. And that's one of the things I really wanted to get your thoughts on too, was how this was one of the first times I'd seen that sort of cinematic framing that now you see in modern comics like all the time, where it just looks like the exact aspect ratio that you'd see at a movie theater. Again, repeat it, repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. And he
Well, they
was,
said many times how watching these movies inspired him. So you got to think Kurosawa and the
yeah,
way he framed his film. Like people still to this day are trying to still ape Kurosawa.
yeah. Another thing that I noticed this time around, which never really dawned on me, was first he didn't use ruled lines for a lot of the borders for the panels. They're very organic looking, right? So he also um, he never quite fills in an entire black. It's all made up of many dense lines. So it almost feels like that the characters are almost vibrating. You know what I mean? Like they're not fully formed. And I think that might be the dreamlike quality of it, but it really works. I mean, me as a viewer reading it too, I was like, wow, this thing feels like it's shaking, you know?
The one thing from Daredevil that carried over to me is the kinetic pacing.
Oh, yeah.
Frank, at this point in time, did so well with the pacing and how the action portrayed on the page. And as I've gotten older, pacing has become a huge thing for me with movies and media I consume, where, and this is my biggest complaint about Jonathan Hickman. I love his writing, but his pacing's fucking horrible. It's linger, 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 get to the moment. I appreciate you stopping in and talking about this, especially talking to an artist like Karl is, who's worked for years. It's interesting to talk about actual pacing, content, the style. Um, I don't usually have a chance to talk to another artist except for Gambit, who he's still forming his style. Um, Ronin was a huge departure, and again, Lone Wolf and Cub had to have been a huge influence on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's been upfront about that and mentioned it, and then the fact that he did the covers to the American editions of Lone Wolf and Cub, I mean, I think that's a tribute to that, you know? What you were saying about pacing, which really I noticed a lot during this, was how, he it's a very densely packed comic in the sense that there is a lot of not exposition but character moments where characters will kind of speak about something in particular, like a lot of the secondary characters, like the kind of hierarchy of Aquarius. Like there's this one sequence where I'm trying to think what the character's name, but he's like the second in command of Aquarius, and he's,
McKenna's husband,
yeah, no, the kind of
or the other guy. Oh god, I can't remember his name, but he was basically the flunky who was like, oh
yeah.
god, I can't believe I did this.
Yeah, and so he had this whole conversation with his wife overlooking New York, and he talks to her about how I can't lose this job. What will happen to us? What's really tough out there? There are 100 people that could take my job. It was a really humanistic moment in this big sci-fi epic that actually made me feel like, wow, he actually thought all these characters out. He actually took the time to be like, what's this guy's motivation? Why would he go along with this guy talking about weaponizing Aquarius and all this other stuff? It's like, well, hey man, this guy's got a life too. And even the soldiers will talk about stuff like, man, I don't want to go out there. The freaks are out there. You
Yeah.
know, he gave a lot of characters a lot of moments, which is something
um
from Daredevil too.
McKenna, I also like reading it, I was like, oh, this is Martha Washington.
A
This is
little
the
bit.
early form of Martha Washington.
Yeah, I also thought it was really cool that the way he introduced Casey and then kind of how she evolved over the course of the
Very
story
much so.
was amazing. That to me is really like the arc of the story. The arc of the story really isn't the Ronin, it's really Casey.
It
And
does
for,
become Casey's story in the second half, where the first half it's the Ronin slash oh crap, I can't remember his name because he's barely there for
the little hippie
um
guy.
Billy.
Yeah, yeah.
Billy who becomes the Ronin, which
Yeah,
that whole transformation scene, and again, this subverts the reader so much because you're thinking one thing, and by the time you get to the end, It's kind of got a Shyamalan twist.
Yeah. The way that they get to it though is when McKenna is all hopped up on drugs and he's talking to the therapist lady.
Yes.
And I thought that was kind of, for me, I was like, oh, this is rough. This
I
is,
didn't kind of see it coming though. Like I
yeah.
kind of it hit it enough for me as the reader where I was like, wait, whoa, what?
Well, here's my thing. If you would have been telling that same story now today, and you said there's psychics, it's a metaversal kind of thing. It's this kid taking a power fantasy and turning it into reality through psychic powers. If I was to tell you that today, 2021, you'd be like, a lot of people might get it. But if you were telling that to a 1983 audience,
No.
so I mean, I think he had to kind of double down on the information in order to get the whole concept across to people.
I found this to be a very subversive book where your expectations going in that, fuck, it's Frank Miller, dude did Daredevil, Ninjas, and then you read it and you get one story at the first 10 pages, and then all of a sudden you go to this futuristic society, and then possession, and then you go into this whole other tale. Like, I don't know, like, because 83 I wasn't fully reading at the time. I'd say 86 is where like I fully got integrated.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of, I missed it completely, but year one, Dark Knight Returns and all that were like right there. I want to say I probably read this in 90.
Yeah. I just think some of the stuff that was coming out, like Star Slammers came out a little bit before that. So there were some, and then, you'd see American Flag came out around that era too. So, that whole grouping of people, Walt Simonson, Frank Miller, Bill
Howard
Sienkiewicz,
Chaykin.
They all shared studio space at different times. And so they all knew each other. And I think that you were seeing some of that explosion of these very science fiction oriented, but mature science fiction,
I'd also say one of the most subversive books I read during that time, which at the time I don't know if I appreciated fully, had to have been Strike Force Morituri.
Yeah, I think that was probably after this, but it's around that era.
It was around 86, 87 when that was going on, but I remember just, these are people getting powers to fight aliens that know they're going to die.
Yeah. I mean, look at even something like Alien Legion that came out during that time, around that era. You did see quite a bit of experimental stuff happening. When I say experimental, I mean non-traditional superhero. And a lot of these.
I think it was a great time to experiment, especially Frank Miller. I think his style completely changed. I mean, considering going from Daredevil to this, there was a drastic change in his art style where it was almost a painted version.
Yeah. And I think that allowed for you, the coloring in this allowed for him to do things that I don't think he could have done in a traditional comic book format. Like
non-traditional line work as well.
Yeah. But like, for example, there's a lot of stuff where you'll see a panel and he's cutting in between scenes, and then you have a high contrast blues, and then all of a sudden you see him with the horse, and it's line art and it's tans and pinks. And so you're able to mentally jump, between the scenes. And I don't think you could have done that on a normal newsprint comic. So the format kind of opened it up for him.
Which is why he asked for it to be on this particular paper where the painting would be represented well, the colors would pop. And again, like, I remember when Teen Titans switched this form with that paper, I remember being real pissed about the price. Which was funny because $1.25 now is a joke.
Yeah, you'd be like, wow, that's amazing. Well, this is a perfect thing of where you saw an artist marry the concept with the format. And I think a lot of times artists were kind of, because back in the day, when I was first getting into comics, the big deal was who was going to ink you, because you needed somebody that could ink you and represent the underlying style and not mess it up or not take it in a different direction. And so when you're seeing this, you're seeing all of his line art, and you're seeing all of the coloring. It's a really full representation of his vision, and that's something that you hadn't really seen too much before.
And by the way, George Perez's art showing up on that paper back when Titans was coming out.
Yeah.
I can't even tell you enough how much it meant to see George Perez's art just blown out like it was. Like, I have an incredible love for George Perez,
Oh
and
yeah.
God bless him and what he's going through
Oh yeah.
right now.
For sure.
Absolutely. We are doing a crisis show with Gambit, and kind of celebrating George Perez. If you want to come on and talk about his art,
Oh, sure.
um,
Speaking of that, when Titans switched to the Baxter paper, that whole look is I had started getting into Teen Titans around the time of the Judas contract, right? And then I started working backwards and going back and reading all the different Titans books leading up to that, because back then you could get those Titans books for next to nothing, even
yeah.
the ones, yeah. So I build up, and as I was catching up, that's about when it turned into the Baxter series. So it was like perfect timing for me as a fan, because I had just gone back and read all those, and George Perez is just as much of an icon as he is. I still think he's sort of underrepresented and underappreciated in some ways.
So I have a story from a convention I was at. A guy in Artist Alley did a Wonder Girl commission for me, and I was in line for George Perez. He did a Wonder Girl commission for me, and he looked at the commission. He goes, "It's a really good Wonder Girl." I was like, "Oh yeah, I just had it done by this artist." He goes, "Go get him for me." I was like, "What?" He goes, "Go get him." I was like, "You want me to go bring him here?" He's like, "Yeah." So I went over to the artist. I was like, "Hey, George Perez wants to talk to you." And he goes, "Get the fuck out of here." I was like, "No, like, he told me to come get you. He liked what you did." He goes, "Are you messing with me?" I was like, "I wouldn't be over here." Just so George is like, "Hey, I really like what you did," and then gave him tips.
Wow.
And it was the sweetest, most beautiful thing I ever saw. And this dude was almost in tears. Because for George Perez to like actually come over, want you to talk to you about what the art you did, meant the world for him. And George is one of the biggest treasures, I think. Like every con, I've never seen him being mean, just off. He's always been the nicest guy. Like, and I think people overlook what he's brought, even as a Latin artist. Like he was one of the first few, other than Jorge Luis
Garcia Lopez. Yeah.
Garcia Lopez. Yes, like they were the two first that I really knew of.
Yeah. Well, the thing about George Perez was that he was one of those guys that was as great doing Marvel characters as he was doing DC characters, and his interiors were just as. I mean, I even think his covers were better than his interiors, which is saying so much because his interior work was just fantastic. I mean, I think about whether it be Crisis or Infinity Gauntlet.
His Titan stuff is probably the tightest.
Yeah,
honestly.
The Baxter series Titan stuff, I think, was probably, and the issues leading right up to that before they transitioned over.
And Disco Nightwing.
Yeah.
So yeah, this comment, Bill Sienkiewicz with Sienkiewicz's artwork with Frank's scripts on Elektra Assassin. Again, I think it's overlooked. In Bill's artwork at the time, I think that's when he hit the full transition over to his more painted style.
Yeah.
Which at the time I think turned off a lot of people.
I'm sure it did, and I know his New Mutant stuff freaked a lot of people out.
Yes, especially going from the initial artist, I forget of New Mutants.
Like Bob McLeod.
McLeod, yes.
Yeah. And I loved his work too for different reasons. But I'm sort of one of those people that except for a few times that I can remember, I'm okay with the artwork switching, and I like very traditional comic art on one side, and then I can look at like Havoc versus Wolverine and Kent Williams and be like, that's cool too. It's just all part of the larger concept of what a comic could be, and I think that's the thing that I feel Bill Sienkiewicz has kind of always been, where he's like, God, what's the director of Dune?
Oh, Denis Villeneuve.
No,
Or
the
you talk about the original Jesus Christ.
I can't believe I could
I've
remember.
just talked about him before, and I can't remember Mulholland Drive.
Drive, Eraserhead.
Yeah. Oh,
I
Jesus
cannot
Christ.
believe
David
I'm
Lynch.
what?
David Lynch.
David Lynch. Oh my God, I cannot believe you and I. We should get our cinema heads license revoked.
I have a
But,
cinema.
and we did it, and we did it live too on a stream. Horrible. We should be ashamed.
It's
But
a comic
anyways,
show. So.
exactly. But Bill Sienkiewicz to me is kind of the David Lynch of comics in the sense that, like, I've always felt David Lynch, he pushes the boundaries of cinema, maybe not in directions that you may enjoy or even make sense to you, but he's still pushing them. And I feel like Bill Sienkiewicz was that for comics during that time, where he was going out there and really pushing the boundaries of what a comic could be.
Fascinating. Bill Sienkiewicz confused for a Klimt or Bacon piece.
Well, that
I could see Klimt almost.
That Electra Assassin poster, Klimt, I could see for sure, or Klimt. The Electra Assassin one, I think he might be referring to is that all black cover with her tone
Yes.
profile. That piece is just amazing. To this day, I see it and I just go, "Wow, what a beautiful piece!"
I had bought the IDW collected edition of the Bill Sienkiewicz Demon Bear saga.
Mm-hmm.
The process pieces were just fucking amazing.
Yeah.
And it's weird. There's not many artists that I get off as much as I do as Bill Sienkiewicz. Like, I just think the experimentalism of it is what draws me to it. And I think Frank, when he made his change, I think also drew me to it because Dark Knight was like nothing he had done before. And same with Ronin, it was nothing like he had done before.
Yeah.
Ashley Wood is another guy that I feel when he puts stuff out, I gravitate to because it's not like anyone's doing.
What's the other artist you said?
Ashley Wood.
Oh, Ashley Wood. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like Ashley Wood is sort of that next step in the evolution of like a Bill Sienkiewicz, where he does sort of abstract, but his work, I'd say, has like and I'm saying this in the best possible way, has a cartoonish element to it.
A little bit. Jason
really
Sean
like.
Alexander, I think, is a guy who he does Philadelphia, where he's like a bastardized Sienkiewicz and Ashley Wood combined.
I will say this, man. I don't know if artists appreciate when you say their bastardized version. You could say
you take your influences from, but like you can see like it's two styles being mashed together, and I don't know how to put it. Like, David Finch was one that originally when he came out, I was like, oh, he took Silvestri and kind of mashed together two styles to bring his style.
I think that could be said for many, many, many artists.
But I just remember the Image documentary. Rob was the first person to say that Silvestri was the best penciler out of all of them.
Yeah. Well, I worked with Mark on the first issue of Cyberforce, and I got to sit with him every day and watch him while he was drawing. He didn't go at drawing the way other people I'd seen. He didn't draw like Jim or Wills, or he didn't draw as much under drawing. He would draw really very loose, and then he would kind of begin to just fill it out. Yeah, and that's the part that always amazed me about him. He just had that ability to know.
But it always looked like tight pencils. That's what's kind of shocking.
Yeah, it is. It's weird. It's like you're seeing someone who has such a clear idea of what they're going to draw before they draw it. And they're almost like, I know this is a cliche and a lot of people have said it before, but it has that thing where you're almost seeing them trace it onto the page, but they're not really tracing it. It's just coming out of their head. He's that guy. He has that ability to kind of just blow it right out of his brain, right onto the page, man.
It's one of those things I always laughed about because people go after Greg Land about light boxing.
Right.
Neil Adams has forever said he lightboxed everything.
Yeah. I mean, I've there's a story I have about Neil Adams, but that's something you and I can talk about after the show or
I've
but
seen some Neil Adams stuff. It shows that honestly, like, hurt my heart because I saw him shake down a little kid,
I've never seen
and
him do something like that.
it
I have
it
seen
hurt me.
I've seen him give feedback to artists that was pretty rough. Um, but you know that a lot of what they're talking about are things. You know, the guys that were in the '70s and early '80s and even the '60s of comic book, a lot of them did other jobs beside comic books. So they would do design jobs.
Advertising. Neil Adams was an advertiser.
Right. So a lot of those kind of things that you see them use, even, you know, the Wally Wood thing where it tells you all the different shots that always work. And these are all shortcuts for these guys who are like, hey, I'm not getting paid a lot and I need to crank this out. And here are a couple different little tips that I can use to kind of push my artwork along.
Silvestri is one of those guys where I appreciate the fact that, like, he does what he wants to do now. Like, if he's
Yeah.
interested, he'll do it. Again, like, I know you saw pages for his Batman that he was working on where you and a few others said it was some of the best work you've ever seen by him.
Yeah. Um, it's no doubt what I've seen of it is his best work.
And I remember it was Scarecrow, and just Silvestri, I think, is kind of secretly one of the best artists of our last 20 years, but he doesn't work enough.
I mean,
He's a businessman at this
you
point.
could probably say over the last like um in terms of just his draftsmanship ability, I would say, yeah, maybe even in the last 20 years, he probably hasn't done as much work as he did maybe even the 10, 15 years before that when he was doing X-Men and Wolverine and then his Cyberforce stuff and all that. That was really almost 25 years ago when he did all that stuff, you know?
I know we're talking about a lot of artists here, but I'll be honest, without Frank Miller and his contributions, I don't think a lot of these guys come and make the impact they did, because I feel like Image was kind of like a weird reply to Frank Miller and his pushing back against
Oh,
the
I think,
norms.
yeah, I think you're totally right about that. I
Neil
think,
Adams as well, who pushed back against
well,
everybody for a long time.
I think Frank Miller is not just him as an artist, which a lot of people obviously admire. A lot of other artists admire it, but I think they admire the fact that he's been able to do what he wants to do on his own terms and have it be successful and successful over a long period of time. You know, he makes a comic book, it's his own original thing, Sin City, it gets turned into a cool movie. You know, he does the best version of Batman, not just does it once, but does it twice. You know, he has these legacy characters in Electra. I mean, he's kind of done it all and done it all pretty well, you know. So
Also unheard of that he was able to write and do art for his own book
yeah,
at the time.
yeah, and I think what's weird is that I actually consider him in terms of when he's doing his own stuff. I always see him as being the writer, but his visual ability is so amazing. It just works perfectly with it. I've noticed though when he writes for other people, there's definitely I don't feel necessarily people gel with his writing style. They're not able to bring about the imagery and the way that his writing sort of creates it. Or I think he maybe writes differently for him.
Although that Superman Golden Child,
I liked that. Yeah.
I think that was a good gelling of artist and writer. Raphael Grandpa did the art for it, and I think
Yeah.
it weirdly fit really well.
Yeah. No, I love that piece, but I love Raphael Grandpa. I think he's great. You
He
know,
worships at the altar of Eisner.
yeah, but he also worships at the altar of Miller too. No, I'm talking about Raphael Grandpa.
Oh
Oh,
no, no, he was talking about
oh, okay.
Miller. Would we have gotten Miller without Eisner? Yes, maybe not as grumpy and against the grain.
Well, there's lots of stuff that Frank Miller does that you know, it's funny because just really quick back to what you said about inspiring the image creators is I do think in a lot of ways Ronin is the playbook for not only format, but storytelling as well. A lot of the kind of style of storytelling where it has those long panels, you saw them in Daredevil, but this was the
Yes.
first time you really saw them in a creator-owned book. And that kind of the way that Frank Miller stages a scene, you started to see a lot of creators. And another thing that he does is how he cuts between scenes. That's something that you start to see the image guys do. And then it's like story, story, big shot, story, big shot again, story, story, you know, and that
And
kind of,
again, for this time in history, a creator being allowed this freedom was not normal. Like Frank Miller had the cachet, and DC desperately wanted him over there just for the name. That they basically gave him what he wanted, and this wouldn't have happened if he didn't have the name.
yeah. But also he had the consistency of delivering, taking a book that was like Daredevil was not a great selling comic and turning it into a bestseller and doing it consistently.
Daredevil was bi-monthly, almost ready to be canceled when he took over.
Right. But you know, talking about the rhythmic quality of the storytelling that he had in there, where he did a lot of stuff that used to be kind of frowned upon in comics. Like for example, there's this big shot towards the end where he sees the warriors, and he's seeing them in his mind as the Agat's warriors, but really they're
Well,
the
a page
robots.
like this would not
Yeah.
have happened in the
Well,
Marvel book.
could you turn to that page at the end where it shows the warriors all there, where Casey and him are facing off towards the very end of the book. Well, you know, a shot like that would have been considered not something that you would want uh, to really have for readers. You know, they might get lost of where what the next panel is. Uh, Actually, I think right before that, it's where it's a long shot along the top and has all the warriors there, and their legs are kind of fading out.
That
No, one more. I think it's like one or two more. Sorry,
it's all right.
it's the warriors all along the top. I think it's like the page or two before that. But anyways,
Again, like it's speed line kind of stuff.
yeah, but also even the way you see like the characters sort of, yeah, that's it. You see how the characters' legs are fading out on the bottom. This was used by like Mignola, Rob Liefeld used it, Jim Lee used it.
Don't talk about Rob Liefeld legs. Gets
I know
everybody
it
worked
would,
up.
I know people do, but you know what? It's so many other guys used it too, and it's used in great effect there, where you didn't used to see stuff like that, where the reader was expected to sort of fill out the rest of it, you know, and that kind of staging where you would do an entire long panel and then small panels along the bottom. You didn't really see that stuff in comics in the 70s and even leading up to that in the 80s.
This is a good question.
Hey, it's Randy. Love Randy. Randy's a longtime friend. It said,
Grendel.
is there any series you wish Miller had swing a few issues or a short arc on? That's a great.
Matt Wagner's Grendel for me. Like I think he could bring something kind of odd or weird, or even Mage.
Yeah, I think those would be awesome. I don't know if you remember this, but there were ads that Marvel put out for him taking over Doctor Strange. Do you remember that?
100%, I'd be okay with that. Rom, he
Yeah.
did the first cover for, and it misled me, but I loved Rom anyway.
Yeah, I think seeing him on something like that would have been fantastic.
I'd also say Matt Wagner is a huge person who was influenced by what he was able to do on this book.
Yeah, I mean, there was kind of a zeitgeist at that time. You know, a lot of people were kind of plugging into some of the that look. You know, not I wouldn't say it's a particular look, but definitely like this noir or cartoonish thing that was sort of floating around at that time. You know.
So, Rob, he was a rock star at the time. Like, he gave a lot of people a lot of opportunities when he started Extreme, including Karl. And he paid better than according to him, anybody else. And if you look at a lot of people out in the industry right now, Todd Knock included, and some others, like Rob had an interesting cast of characters at Extreme that kept going. Eric Stevenson, in particular, who was writing, became the CEO of Image.
Yeah, I mean, even someone like Andy Park, who got his start at Extreme, now he designs every character for the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Who was the artist who did the art on the Batman animated? Matsuda?
Yeah, he worked on one of the Batman animated shows.
He did a lot of animation work.
Yeah, I think he works over at Blizzard. I think they both work over at Blizzard now, if I'm not incorrect. But yeah, I mean, like a all-star team right there of people.
I mean, Miller with Claremont on the Wolverine series is about as good as you'll get.
Yeah, it's weird because it feels a little bit like it has more of his. I feel like Claremont in a way was writing as if he was Frank Miller on those. Like he really kind of, you know what I mean? He had that kind of rhythm to his writing. And then what's weird is after the Wolverine miniseries, I feel that carried on into the way that Claremont wrote a lot of those Paul Smith issues, and even the way that Paul Smith laid those issues out had a very similar feel to the Wolverine.
There's another guy I feel doesn't get the respect. Paul Smith was very good.
Oh my God!
Great draftsman, and I don't think he got the respect he deserved for the run he did.
Yeah, I mean that guy is just off the charts. The other one I think who doesn't get as much love is Miller on Moon Knight would have been good. Yeah.
Yes.
The other guy I don't think gets enough love is Rick Leonardi. I love Rick Leonardi's artwork.
And he's filled in on everything. He did Moon Knight for a while. He did
Daredevil issues. Yeah, I know that.
But he did a little bit of everything.
And Spider-Man 2099.
Smith should have absolutely. Paul Smith, I don't say people got screwed over a lot, but I feel like he never got the run he deserved. And maybe because he was aping other people a little bit. But he had to for that book.
Yeah, I don't feel Paul Smith aped people. I thought he had a very original style. I don't know if do you remember the stuff he did on Doctor Strange? He did a great run on Doctor Strange.
I remember it was short. That's all I really remember.
It was some good issues. And then the stuff he did for Marvel Fanfare. I mean, Paul Smith, so good. Yeah, Leonardi's run on New Mutants was great. He's awesome.
Cerebus, American Flag, Love and Rockets, Mage, Grendel, John Sable Freelance I forgot about.
Yeah.
Nexus was great. And that's another book that, like, Mike Barron is another guy who kind of just got buried by history.
Yeah. This is, talking about this lineup right here. It's funny because this was sort of one thing that was happening where you were seeing all these books that were kind of creator-owned type books. And then there was also the black and white explosion that kind of followed a little bit after this. We had the Ninja Turtles and Fish Police and X-Mutants and Shuriken and all these comics that kind of came out that were black and white, but they were really good sellers. There was a lot happening, man, in between like 82 and 87, I'd say.
Mike Barron's another guy I feel never got the run he deserved, but he was very stringent about what he would do and what he would not do.
Right.
Some of them I'd say almost Paul Pope of the current day, where I think Paul Pope has such a experimental style. His Batman Year 100 I really loved, but his style didn't really translate to the modern reader.
Well, I'd say there's three artists that I kind of group together in my head a lot, like Paul Pope, Jamie Hewlett, and Ashley Wood. To me, sort of are these guys who sort of work around the peripheral of mainstream comics. They have very striking, very original styles. And I think they're well respected because of that. People look at their styles and go, these are awesome. And you see them do a lot of stuff outside of comics just because their work is so versatile. But I feel those are three artists that don't really do big runs on books, but everybody knows they're really super talented and leaning have more artistic leanings. So yeah, I understand why they're not as big in comics because they don't do the runs, but um, they're still, I think, beloved by the real true comic heads. You know.
Randy's got a question here. I've got one name that pops up to the top of my head that I think artistically and storytelling wise that I think is better than most. And J.H. Williams III is my dude because the way he uses the panels to express that's outside of the norm,
Uh-huh.
I 100% love. Pushing the envelope though.
I like James Herron, the guy who does Ultra Mega. I
Mm.
think he does some. It's his work has a kind of retro element, especially when he uses like um, dot patterns and stuff like that. But it's just his stuff's so fun to look at. It doesn't feel mainstream, but yet it's still really grounded in solid draftsmanship. Really good artist.
There is another artist that I think doesn't get the appreciation does, but I think he's the spiritual successor to Frank, and that is Daniel Warren Johnson, who did the Beta Ray Bill series and Wonder Woman Dead Earth.
Hmm.
He
Yeah.
just has such a distinctive art style that is loose, almost cartoonist style,
Yeah.
but he's telling such a story that can only be translated by the art style he's using.
Yeah. I think you even turned me on to that Beta Ray Bill run. I went back and
It
got all those. It's just
incredibly
fantastic.
good.
Oh, it's so good. I mean, every panel feels like he really thought it out, and it's its own little artistic expression within the book. And it was actually, I thought, a pretty good story. You know?
Beta Ray Bill's another character who doesn't get used often. Christopher Voorhees, I don't know the artist. Another guy I think gets slept on way too often, and I know you and I are both fans of Travis Charest.
Oh, yeah. I think it's because he doesn't
I
do as
think he's
much.
more of an illustrator.
Yeah, but man, talk about a guy that he started in one kind of style and then really developed his own thing out of it. Yeah, that guy's great.
Frank Santoro, I'm not 100% familiar with his stuff, but now I kind of want to look it up that people are recommending it. Paul Pope has such a distinctive style. Also, I felt like it took people time to catch up on it.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember when he came out, I was thinking to myself, this guy's returning back. He's going away from pens, and he's really doing a lot of brushwork type stuff. And I thought that really gave his work a real kinetic quality, you know. But now I'm seeing more and more of artists using brush again or brush stuff in digital to give it that look where it looks a little bit like it's a little more random than what we'd seen for in the 90s and early 2000s where it was still that really clean look. Oh, yeah, he is awesome.
Jerome Opina, I really liked on Seven to Eternity.
Yeah, that guy's really good, Randy.
Riley Rossmo is another guy. Steve Orlando, when he was on the show, he talked about working with Riley, and he was like, I think he's the most slept on artist. He
Mhm.
did the Batman Shadow book, and he has another distinctive style that is somewhere in between cartoony and illustrator.
Hmm.
And I think there's appreciation to be had. Brandon Graham is another guy who has a very distinctive style. I remember reading Prophet that he was working on. It reminded me very
Oh
much
yeah,
of Akira.
yeah, yeah. No, and this even the stuff he did before Prophet was he did some really cool stuff before that even.
And even to remind me of Katsuhiro Otomo in general is kind
Yeah,
of an
that's always
interesting
a good
thing, which
thing.
this reminded me of with the bioorganic technology that is Virgo.
Yeah, it has that
The,
vibe in it.
Yeah, there's very much a lot of, and I don't know. I started trying to figure. I was like, wait, did this come out before Akira, or was Akira in print before this?
It's a good question.
Akira was 86, at least in the US.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I know it'd been serialized for a while prior to it coming out here, and it
By the way,
wasn't.
the 4K is coming out for $19 next month for
Man, I really
Akira.
wanted to see it, and it was COVID, so it was like, it came out kind of at the height of COVID, which I was bummed out. I really wanted to see that on IMAX.
Um, Wait, there, and I know we've gotten off the subject of this book, but I love talking kind of art and artists maybe people aren't following. And there's so many people out there, and I'd be a fool to say Frank didn't influence a lot of these people, because I'd say during a certain point during the 80s, if Frank didn't inspire somebody, Art Adams did.
Yeah, I would say, Frank Miller was he was influencing pros, indie people. It was weird how he kind of transcended that. He was someone who was known, I mean, not known, but beloved by people that were mainstream people, beloved by people that were more indie. That's really unusual for that period of time, you know?
Is it weird for you, like seeing people who are now influenced by people who came up with people you did?
Um, yeah, I think though what's really different from what I've seen when I've talked to a lot of uh, kind of newer creators is when I was coming up, the people really kind of knew who who was the guy who made the guy. Do you know what I mean? Like they kind of
Who
knew,
influenced who?
yeah, who influenced who and who influenced them before that. So if you really want the original DNA, go seek out that original look and then kind of evolve from there, maybe. Where now I think today there's less of a kind of a knowledge of who came before, and it's more just looked at as like, oh, I want to emulate a comic book style. Well, I'll just look at some styles that I like and then make something from that. So we're in a different era in terms of how media is digested, but I think it's also how styles are formed. And I don't think there are very many new artists that are coming out with what I would call traditional Western American comic book styles. Most everything is influenced by manga on some level, even whether it comes to um, uh, whether it be just the form of the anatomy or the staging of storytelling or the use of speed lines. And this was all stuff that was really, really not being used up until more recently in American comics. So all the artists I see have that influence, which is fine. It's part of the global style. Manga is, I think, the global artistic style for youth. And that's, I think, a fair thing to say. But
It outsells anything right now,
yeah, but it is
except Walking Dead.
right. But the thing about, I think, American comics, the feeling of American comics comes through in a lot of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and even to some extent the DC stuff. So both styles are having a level of acceptance that's unprecedented. It's just being, how is it drilling down to the creatives? And I think creative people, it seems younger ones, are way more influenced by manga, way influenced by anime, video games. Even video games probably has a bigger influence than American comics, you know?
I mean, for me, the biggest waste of talent was probably Joe Madeira, because he was drawn in between so many influences that eventually he went to video games. And had he stayed at what he was doing, he might have gone down as one of the all-time greats. His pacing was good, his storytelling was good.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of he's he's so influential for
Roger Cruz built his whole career on him.
what's that?
Roger Cruz built his whole
Yeah,
career on Joe
I don't know. I
Madeira.
don't know if you've seen any of the modern Roger Cruz stuff, but it's really
It's
good.
evolved a little bit.
Yeah. But I think with Joe Mad is he was sort of like the perfect.
He was an outlier.
Yeah, no, he hit that kind of sweet spot between American comic books and Capcom, and not to mention he's just a really great draftsman. I mean, he
I
really
feel like
can draw.
I feel like Scotty Young is maybe the perfect amalgamation right now.
I feel like there's guys that are coming out, especially the Italian guys who work on the X-Men stuff. they've kind of, to me, become the new default style, which is this kind of look where it takes elements of traditional that makes it look traditional, but it's mostly done digital. And
Well,
you can,
Scotty, it's the cartoony, almost anime style in the way
yeah,
he's able to merge it and still be able to draw it in kind of a time frame that's acceptable to publishers.
yeah. What's weird though is I feel like he sort of what had probably his biggest influence maybe 10 years ago, where
Oh,
today,
with the Wizard of Oz stuff, he
yeah, but I feel like
100%.
the two people that have really influenced modern American comics the most is Copiel and I don't know how you say his name, but
Immerman.
Immonen. Yeah. So those two guys, I think their styles have become,
Oliver Coipel, his Magic Order stuff, I think might be his best work
yeah,
with
he's
Miller.
yeah, he's great.
Immerman, I think, is one of the most underappreciated on time drafters.
Yeah, but that look that he established, the proportions, the lighting kind of patterns, you see that in all the modern Marvel books, especially the X-Men stuff.
Well, I feel Marvel also kind of has a house style right now. And maybe it's because to make it come out on time, like maybe that's why we don't see the top artists there anymore.
Well, the top artists now I think have figured out that it's probably,
You use them and make covers.
yeah, do make your money off the covers, and then if you want to do a create your own thing, do that, you know.
J. Scott Campbell is set by making covers.
Yeah. And he's really good at it. That's the thing. I mean, he's figured out the formula.
Yeah, there's people that have figured it out, and I think there's some up and comers. Mark Brooks, I think, is another guy who's kind of figured it out.
Yeah, he's really good too, but I mean, you don't see any interior stuff from him very
No,
much.
no, but I think he's figured out I can make more from doing covers. Um, oh God, what was the other artist I was thinking? McNiven. When he does
Yeah.
interiors, people stop and they will look for it because it's time consuming. Gary Frank, I don't think there's an artist who's made more improvement over the past 10 years than Gary Frank has.
Yeah. No, he's really jumped in leaps and bounds.
But his time to creation has also, I mean, Doomsday Clock, 5-month delays.
Wow.
But when his pencils came out, I was like, you know what? I'm glad I waited. And I don't know how many artists people are willing to do that for now. Jim Lee, definitely, he put something out, people will wait.
Yeah. I think though it's hard to say. I mean, I think there's the comic industry now is sort of dispersed in a way. Like the average person or who follows it, they're more interested, I think, in some ways in tie-ins or covers or things like that versus, hey, I'm going to follow someone on a particular run. A lot of people just sample the run and then come back and pick up the trade.
Well, there's three different types of readers now. There's your spec people, who are the same assholes who contacted Donny Cates asking what characters he was introducing, and don't worry, I don't read it. I just want to know. That really happened.
Wow.
You have your art fanboys who will follow artists from book to book. And then there's your readers slash, I guess what you'd call trade collectors.
Right.
For Image, of course, if you don't buy the single issues, the creators suffer.
Yeah.
Supposedly, from what I heard from the format, that Image makes the majority of their money from the trades. Creators make the majority of the money from the single issues.
Yeah. The chains
So a
work.
book like Saga probably does wonders both ends. Walking Dead, both ends. Then you have your in-between titles where I would call your reminders, where you get a little bit of both.
Yeah. It's definitely come down to more people want to get more bang for their buck when they read the books, and I appreciate that. I mean, that's why I think you see manga sell so well nowadays. They get more out of putting 9.99 into it, you know.
You know who also I think would be my favorite Marvel person? Okay, I just saw your private message. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
I mean, if you need to take a break for a bit, I can rant for a little bit.
Sure, if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I can vamp for a little bit. There's enough people in the chat.
Okay.
But whenever you're ready to go for a little bit, yeah, we're still. I think there's a lot more on the meat on the bone that we can do.
Okay. If anyone wants to know what the private chat was, I want to put my kids to sleep, so I'll be right back.
So, of someone who I think would make a great Miller collaborator would be Sean Gordon Murphy. I think Karl put it before. Sean Gordon Murphy draws trash better than anyone else, and I think that he would be one of those people that could collaborate well with Miller. And I know we haven't gone far into this story, and I am sorry so far, but there's just way too much to talk about on this and the influences this book has had. Oh boy. I said this now, and I'm now at a loss. Architectural foam panels and columns. Thank you for coming by in the chat. I appreciate you coming by and joining in. Appreciate anybody joining in on this. It's basically the rantings of madmen at this point. David Aja, I think, is only doing covers right now. Although him with Ann Nonocenti, kind of, I have a little bit of appreciation for it because she did some of my favorite Daredevil runs. I started on Daredevil during the John Romita Jr. run, which was with Bullet and Typhoid Mary, and I very much appreciated that run. I am drinking Bobby Dragon's Milk. It is 14% alcohol, and I'm getting a little lit on it. Thank you for asking, though. Sean Gordon Murphy actually, honestly, is the ideal Miller collaborator. I think there's a certain bit of his art that would blend well with Miller's writing. And as Karl has said in the past, nobody draws trash better than Sean Gordon Murphy. And if you want a trashed out New York, that is who you want doing it. Gordon Murphy, I also think, is one of those artists who maybe slept on a little bit.
Sean Gordon Murphy?
A little bit.
Oh, no, man. I think everybody loves that guy's work.
Oh, no, there's a whole people who think he's Comic Gate.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
You know, I have to admit, I mean, I know about all that stuff peripherally, but I don't follow it that much. But man, I know one thing, he can sure draw.
Yeah, like there is a style, and when you see it, you know it's him. And I think that should be a hallmark of an artist. If you can look at it and say, that's this person. I think Jay Lee is one of those people. You look at it and you're like, that's Jay Lee.
Yeah. The thing about Sean Gordon Murphy is I don't know if he's ever had a bad job. Like, I don't know if he's put out a book that I've seen, except for maybe he did like some early G.I. Joe stuff. But once he kind of went mainstream and started doing larger runs on books, I don't think I've seen him do a really bad one. And that's pretty amazing. And he's a high draftsmanship artist. You know, lots of vehicles, lots of backgrounds. The guy's really good.
He also does the very heavy-handed inking. The lines are super heavy on his art.
Yeah, I actually don't think he's too far from like a Dave Finch or a Jim Lee in the sense that the rendering is very pronounced. It's you can see all the lines. He's not like, for example, I wouldn't put him in like a category with a Paul Pope or an Ashley Wood or something.
No.
But
Um,
he has a little bit of artistic or like artsier kind of flair to his lines. Um, but man, his ability to stage a scene and do storytelling, and then the draftsmanship within it. I mean, I don't know if there's that many artists nowadays that really do what he does in terms of a complete package.
so, Gore, to answer your question, Miller was basically uninvited because of Holy Terror.
Yeah,
There
I
was a
read
bunch
about.
of Middle Eastern artists who were invited to Thought Bubble, and basically they objected to his presence being there.
I yeah, I don't know if I would comment too much about it, but I would feel this is that if you look at Miller's body of work,
He had a knee jerk reaction to 9/11, is basically
right,
what it was.
that's what I feel it was, and I felt like, he expressed it, maybe in a somewhat insensitive way, but it's a weird piece in that it was originally a Batman piece, and then it evolved into something else, and it was kind of, I think, at the height of some of the issues he was challenged with. But what I think would have been better would have been if he was allowed to meet with those creators, and those creators had a
Talk it
chance
out.
to talk to him and maybe express how they felt about it. And then there could be some sort of reconciliation about it, or at least understanding, right?
Probably. So back to the book at hand. I'd say this is a book you could read as two different books almost. There is
We
the
took a long way around to get back to the book.
there is the version that's about the samurai Ronin, and then there is the book about the future.
Yeah.
And
I
this is where I think the Shyamalan part of it comes into, or the sci-fi tropes at the time during the 80s, where you had 2001: A Space Odyssey with
yeah.
Hal, and you had Mother from Alien.
Yeah. Well, this that's interesting you say that, because I think this is something that is what, if I was to say what is Frank Miller's artistic superpower, right? And I think it's something that a lot of people don't really focus in on, is the rhythmic qualities of his storytelling. And in this, he did a great job of going like this, like, past, you
This
know,
was the ad page that was
oh yeah,
used,
they use that
which is a
everywhere.
great page to use for if you're going
Yeah.
to promote.
Yeah, but I mean, you see how through the entire storyline, it's, you know, past, future, New York Aquarius, New York Aquarius, and then it's going constantly chopping back and forth until the stories sort of meld and become one story into the end. And that's something that I think he does a lot. You see it like in Sin City, you see it in the Elektra book, and where it's like Elektra's here, Daredevil's dealing with this, and he intercuts a lot. And he does a really good job of using that kind of cinematic trope, but in a comic book form, you know? So he allows the reader to kind of like absorb this whole space and world, and then absorb another world. And then towards the end, it's just like he forces the overlap, when the overlap happened, it refocuses the story. It's particularly pronounced in Ronin. Like when you
Which
realize the twist actually takes both stories and goes like this, you know?
which for the time nobody was doing anything like that. I don't think an editor would have pulled their hair out with you
No.
even wanting to do that.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. I mean, people were still in the bang pow boom era of comics where they were saying these are all for kids. And this was one of the first comics I felt that really said
Do
this is
you
absolutely not.
remember DC had those ads? DC Comics no longer for kids, and it was a
Yeah.
Batman ad
We have to remember too. Remember, heavy metal, like, or Metal Hurlant in France had already come out, so you started to see some of the stuff,
using the higher end paper that he
right,
wanted for
and the
this.
higher end coloring. And then I think that's why so much of what you see especially in the first couple issues of Ronin, are very Mobius inspired. You know?
Also, for anybody who wants to piss on colorists or think they're not important, I think colorists at this point in time in art are more important than your inker.
Wow, man, that is a strong statement, but it's not unfounded.
There's some books where I think do you read Black Hammer at all by Lemire?
I think you and I talked about it, but I have not caught up to it yet.
So I think that inker on that book is more important than possibly the inker because of the extremes of the color and how it pops and how it draws your eye away.
Well, my thought on that is that, there was
The color is
decades,
supposed to accentuate.
well, decades and decades of comic book, American comic book artwork, and this, even if you look at it globally, whether it be bande dessinée or manga, it was all being pushed towards how do we communicate in a simplistic fashion on a low grade printing form. And so line art was developed, cross hatching, all these different styles, whether it be the dot patterns, were all created to get the best thing across in a low paper quality, low print quality kind of look, right? And then now, where the paper on the average comic book is fantastic, the printing, you can see every line. And then the coloring, though, the introduction of digital coloring to me sort of is at odds with what decades and decades of comic book line art was created for. So when they mesh together, something has to be sacrificed, whether it's the kind of line quality, which I think a lot of times you'll see the line quality kind of get suppressed by the coloring because it just overwhelms it. So I think a colorist like Dave Stewart, who colors Mignola's stuff, I think he does a great
Yes.
job of balancing color to allow Mignola's strong line art to come out. And this was kind of
Matt Wilson's another one that I notice when he colors. Most of what he seems to do is muddy art.
mm-hmm.
So for like Francavilla's art on some pages, and then on Witches with Jock, where it's a contrast of color,
Yeah.
I think it stands out.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is kind of, you can over render with today's artwork, but if you draw the line art in a specific way, then I think you can take advantage of digital coloring. You just sort of have to commit to what's that final vision of that thing going to be. Like something like Saga, to me, does a good job of taking what would
I
is
feel it
digital.
it companions well. It's
Yeah.
not overpowering. It's not. It's just there to complement.
Right, but I mean, there's lots of examples in Saga where the shadow or the kind of line art is almost used as a color hold, where the shadow is represented by a specific color, you know? So the color shape, like say, for example, a face or something, it has a specific color and it's maybe a dark purple against a light purple. And it looks like somebody in the coloring stage said, I'm going to take this entire piece of line art and represent it as a solid color. So it's, I think, kind of balancing that in a way that really looks great, but doesn't overtake it.
Tim Sale, his work on the Long Halloween in particular, I thought the colors overpowered his actual artwork in some scenes with
Mm.
blood showing up where, and I'm sure it's intentional that the blood would completely draw your eyes away from. Also, there's another artist on Nailbiter, the color artist. Again, with blood coloring, would draw your eye away from the art at times,
Hmm.
intentionally. But um, it always fascinated me when you have those moments of like, shit, the coloring's overpowering the actual art on the page.
Yeah. But to your point about with color sort of becoming the most important thing, I think as a lot of
The
these,
paper improved.
yeah, but also too, I think as a lot, uh, it's what I was talking about earlier, where a lot of artists now are influenced by movies. They always have been in comics, of course, but you know, video games, they're expecting their artwork to be representational of things that are not just made for print. So that's why I think, to your point of that, they could coloring could actually be overtaking inking. I think that could be true because I mean, in some cases, you could just digitally paint over the pencils.
Well, the
You know,
Sin City movie, you remember the parts where the blood was on the ground?
Hmm.
And it drew your attention away from everything else on the screen.
Yeah.
So I'd say that was almost a form of digital coloring.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I didn't think about that, but yeah, I mean, that kind of that digital element has sort of become its own thing, its own feature.
Welcome to Artist Corner, everybody. We're debating art. Um, we haven't gotten much through this book, but I really think there's a lot of points to be made with art versus story, story versus art, and where we were back in 1983.
Yeah.
And if you think for a minute this didn't influence anybody, you'd be very, very wrong. Because I honestly could say Daniel Warren Johnson is incredibly influenced by Miller's work on this.
Yeah, I could see that. But I mean, it's
There
like,
is a there's a style and kind of a sentiment there where this isn't the norm, but this is how I'm telling my story, and you're going to accept it.
yeah, Frank Miller, I think even from the Daredevil days, is a creator that kind of says, I'm going to take you on a ride, and it's my specific way of doing a story. And it's unapologetic, and it doesn't really expect you. It's like get on or get off. It's okay. It's still going to happen, you know? And that's,
TMNT 100% stole Miller's origin for Daredevil.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you think about all the stuff that we know Frank Miller has influenced, and then you think about Ninja Turtles and Samurai Jack, there's a lot of stuff that he's influenced. I mean, think about all the toys that are based off some sort of thing that Frank Miller has influenced. Just Turtles alone is crazy.
Turtles in general, they were unapologetic about this was influenced by him.
Yeah, I don't think they've ever hidden it. That's for sure. And I don't think anyone that would read it, those original issues, look like they're directly influenced from Ronin.
Again, I think I was in middle school in '86, and Ronin was one of those pieces that were out there where you're like, this is so weird and different. I don't know if I should be reading it. And it was adult content, so my comic shop would not let me buy it.
Hmm.
But they let me buy Blood by Epic, which was weird.
Well, I actually worked at a comic book store when I was a kid, and Jeffrey's Comic Books in Gardena. I worked there, and I was there, when the comic was coming out. But I mean, I started working when I was 11. I got a job there, a summer job, and then I continued working there, and that's kind of where I really wasn't into comics before I worked there. But working there, a buddy of mine, his name's Mike Haffenden. He got me the job there, and he was really into comics, and he really helped me get into them. But that was really when I was seeing the book come out. I remember when that sixth one came out, people had kind of given up on it because there was a big. I mean, I think it might have been even a year, 6 months to a year, between the fifth issue and sixth issue.
I remember Camelot 2000 also had a huge gap in between. Even Watchmen had a huge gap in between,
Oh
almost
yeah,
6 to 12
Gary's
months.
body. Yeah,
Swamp Thing transformed mainstream comics. I still think putting that emotional story into a creature book was incredibly different back then.
yeah. I feel like Swamp Thing kind of is the basis for what would become the Vertigo line. That kind of
It's the grandfather, at least.
Yeah, but I mean that style of storytelling influence probably, the Neil Gaiman's, the Grant Morrison's,
Neil Gaiman has said it 100% that without Swamp Thing existing, he never would have made Sandman.
well, there you go. But it definitely set up that whole style.
And Alan Moore has been a curmudgeon of the industry, I guess, at this point, but he lived during a time where respect was not there.
Yeah, it's weird. Like to me, Alan Moore is. Uh, there came a point where I think creators were expected to all want the same thing. Like all of you want your stuff to be turned into movies. All of you want, this to be turned into consumer products. And I think he's like, no, I made a thing, and that's the thing. You know, like I only want people to interact with it in the way that I designed it to be interacted with. And I think that's okay. And I think that's a kind of a thing that creators need to still own in a way. You know what I mean? It's how you want people to interact with something that you created. Do you really want a happy face with a piece of blood on it t-shirt? Maybe, maybe not, but it's still, I think, something that he gets a bad rap for a little bit, but he's the guy who created it. I feel like he should have that say.
I also think Rob, to a degree, had a great moment with Glory, where it got recreated by Sophie Campbell, and I forget who the other person was, where they just completely redid what he did originally, and he was like, you know what, this is great. This is different. I love it.
Yeah, well, he's really seems to be very open to having his work kind of reimagined,
reinterpreted.
Yeah, and I mean that's if you've ever had any conversation with him, he's a huge fan of comic books in general, but also a lot of variety of comics. He's not just into superhero comics. He's into just comics in general and what they can do and how people can kind of the styles that are out there. So it seems like just based on those two that they have he really opened his catalog to that.
And also, if you want to talk about people who made unreal deals, Rob had a deal with Marvel with Jim Shooter, which was unconventional at the time, where, hey, if you create something, you're going to get 10% of it.
Yeah.
With Deadpool and Cable.
Man, I don't know. I don't know about that story.
He mentioned something on Twitter once that he made this deal with Jim Shooter, which basically was like, we're going to give you a piece of whatever if you keep creating these people. And for Cable and Deadpool, I think he said he got 10%. Which,
wow.
If you think about Deadpool, how much it sells,
yeah,
it's a brilliant fucking move.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know he's definitely had an awareness of creator rights and stuff like that. So
yeah, which Neil Adams, if you think back to the past, was very big on. If you look into the whole Schuster case and Neil Adams' involvement, it's very, very profound.
Yeah, he was way ahead of his time, Neil Adams, for sure. Like in terms of wanting creators' rights, and I know he tried to unionize comics. I think in the late 70s, maybe.
Which Image is now unionizing.
Yeah, but they're not unionizing for creators. They're only unionizing within the internal staff of Image.
It's a start.
Yeah, I mean, good luck to them on that. I think that's going to be tough to happen.
I'll be right back. I gotta go break for a minute.
Okay, so I just keep talking. Let's see, any questions out there? I actually don't have much of a collection of comics. I do have a collection of books. I don't have a huge collection of comics, actually. It says, I'm surprised Love and Rocket broke new ground. So many years.
To be honest, I don't think there's enough reprints out there.
Yeah. Because it feels like, man, if that came out today, oh my God.
It would hit hard. It would really hit hard. Grendel also is now, they're reprinting the Omnibus. which I think is going to have a groundswell prior to that series coming out, which I'm sure Netflix will cancel after a year.
What are some of the...
Somebody must have hell of a collection.
Yeah, not as much as you think. Let's see. I have the Katsuhiro Otomo art books, figure drawing by Andrew Loomis, Linedecker book, Blame 1 through 3, the deluxe editions up there. I don't know if you can see all the way up here, but it's the Akira box set at the top.
Akira weirdly had, I think, a giant influence on American culture, especially for artistic types.
We could do a whole thing on Akira.
Amano, I think, also had a huge influence on me with his old Final Fantasy art on top of everything else he did.
Mm-hmm.
Yoshitaka Amano was incredible.
Yeah, I actually have a bunch of his books up there too.
I do too. Giger also, I have a lot of his books too. I love this fact that a lot of it came from his nightmares.
Mm-hmm.
I also think Howard Chaykin is another guy. He gets overlooked, and again, he had some controversial thoughts a couple of years ago, and he kind of gets shit upon, and it's weird because he came from a certain point of time, from a certain point of place. And I know it doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but like with Frank Miller, a lot of the stuff in this book where at this point in time reading it, I was like, boy, there's a lot of ethnic slurs.
Yeah, I noticed that too. But it made me think that he had an awareness of that was wrong, and that almost in the future you would see people being blatant about it. Because there's an element of like...
and it pisses me off because people won't read into that part.
Right.
He's a fucking racist. We're going to dig into this. And I don't... Just from his interaction with people at cons, like there's a little kid on Instagram, Noah's Amazing Reviews, who Frank let be interviewed. And there's stuff with Frank with other people where he's the person like, what's your favorite Batman? He's like, it doesn't matter what my favorite Batman is. What is the Batman that most you react to? And I think Frank's very self-aware.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that I've seen recently that he wears T-shirts of his various stuff is like, I think that's actually kind of cool. It's like, hey, it's like almost meta, like he's like, I'm the guy who made Dark Knight. I'm wearing the Dark Knight shirt. What's up, So yeah, he definitely...
Well, there was that comic book shopping episode that he did that I sent you the link to forever ago with John Schnepp, who passed away, where he was just buying weird cartoonists. That's what he was into. He was into all these indie people nobody was really paying attention to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what weirdly made me think, oh, that's why he picked Raphael Grandpa for Golden Child, because this is a guy who pretty much in the DC universe overlooked, but fit his style.
Yeah. Like I would like to see Miller do something with Quietly, but I feel like Raphael Grandpa is kind of like in the same sphere, but a more cartoon.
Nobody does a chin like Quietly. Like
nobody does a lot of stuff like Quietly. That guy's really good.
He's underrated. He really is. But everybody remembers from Morrison because Superman had this giant fucking chin.
Yeah, but I mean, I think he would be great because his storytelling is really fun too.
Yes.
So I mean, I would love to see a Batman book with those two.
I will say though, for Daredevil, there's not been a better team since Miller than I have seen with Zdarsky and Checchetto.
I didn't follow that.
It's been fucking fantastic. Checchetto's art just hits the right as an old Daredevil fan, it hits that right like melatonin for me, where I'm just feeling it.
Yeah,
And also Zdarsky's writing a fun kind of mob book. At a certain point, Elektra became Daredevil, while Daredevil's been in jail, which is kind of a trope at this point.
yeah, I saw. I actually thought the outfit didn't look too bad, but I have not followed up on it.
40 years old on American flag. Holy shit. Well, I am fucking old at this point because American flag, there were shirts at the comic store I worked at. And Shaken,
I think American
another
flag.
one of those guys.
I think
I mean, there's a ton of indie artists you could throw a brick at and be like, "Hey, this guy was overlooked."
yeah. I would say I would prefer to see an American flag Netflix show than a Cowboy Bebop Netflix show.
I'm not gonna lie, the Grendel series I'm really excited about.
Yeah,
It's been a long time coming, and especially it's one with longevity because you don't have to stay with the same cast season after season.
yeah, you could do pretty much reboot it every season.
Mage is another one I'd love to see just because of how fucking weird it is.
Yeah, I mean the first series, I think that could be like its own thing.
Yeah, very much so. And like for Grendel, I mean they've got everybody cast already, but knowing that the second season you can just dump everybody and jump 20 years into the future, pretty amazing, and have a female protagonist.
Yeah, I almost think they should start with the Christine Spar stuff, but I'm sure. I mean, from what I've seen, it's going to be the Hunter
It's
Rose
a
stuff.
ton of rows, but you could jump back and forth in time now with it.
That's
We could
true.
have one season with, one season without, one season with, one season without.
Yeah, I could
And
totally.
Matt Wagner's another creator where he kind of just did his own thing.
Yeah, and they were able to be successful with it, which is amazing.
Oh, friends gave me a hard time. I didn't read indies and thought it was dirty.
Man, that's
Like
like the trifecta right there. Cerebus
I
was a
remember,
too.
I remember reading Image Comics was a joke back in the day. It was
Was
like,
it?
oh, well, they're just all superheroes with no substance, blah blah blah. And I get it. Like at the time, it was art, no real writing.
I don't know. I co-wrote Bloodstrike, and I thought it was dope.
And then well, so there was the thing during Marvel's prime, like they had all the artists, DC had all the writers, which were usually on their Vertigo line, but still, they had Morrison, they had Gaiman, they had Alan Moore.
But like Neil Gaiman and Grant Morrison and all and that kind of whole bunch, they didn't really blow up right in the beginning. Like when
No, it took years.
it took years, and um, yeah, I mean, I think that what's odd is that if you look at the writing that's on a lot of American comics now, or even a lot of the writing like you see in manga, it's pretty. A lot of it is fight comics. You know, you do see that it's like still being a thing. That influence of that.
And this will probably get me hit, but Naruto had some of the most emotional writing I have read in a manga in a long time.
Right.
I've never cried during a book, but 2 times during that book I cried.
Have you read My Hero Academia?
I'm midway through it.
For whatever reason, that just hits with me, man. Like,
It has a lot of X-Men vibes to it.
yeah, but it's just also too the kind of the you have this person that wasn't special. I mean, it's the classic, a lot of tropes, right? But just the way they mix it together, and that the kid is willing to battle to not be defeated and keeps going. There's something about that it's a weird thing of X-Men, Dragon Ball, a lot of stuff all rolled up into one that I think just works well. And
I mean, it's influences upon influences is what I got from the anime, right? Watching it.
yeah, but the thing is, though, it's influence upon influences to maybe you or I, but when I watch it with my kids,
They
they
don't get it.
they don't get it. They just read it as straight as what it is, or see it as straight as what it is.
Gore Grendel is very much like Hamlet, and the tattoo on my leg with him holding the skull is 100% Hamlet. Whether Matt planned that or not, who knows? Probably. Matt Wagner seems like a very intelligent gentleman.
Yeah.
He now has his son coloring his work, which is fantastic. I love it. And then Grant, 16-year-old artwork. He talked on Kevin Smith's podcast that he sent in artwork to the Conan group saying, hey, whenever Barry's ready to retire, Barry Windsor Smith, I'm ready to take over. Which
awesome.
is so blustery. I love it. But
yeah, you
that's
gotta appreciate
that. So weirdly back to Ronin right now. It's a weird jump between the sci-fi stuff and then going back to the medieval stuff. And then when it all starts to blur together, I remember reading it lately going, okay, is he hallucinating or is this all real? And I think that's kind of the Shyamalan of it.
Well, what I noticed reading it this time is when he jumps back and forth between the two things, he plays each one as, like, for example, when he switches back to the kind of medieval Japan stuff, it plays like it has snappy dialogue. It's kind of like you're watching a Kurosawa film, So like when he switches back and forth, you'll go, okay, here's like he's doing sort of Kubrick, right? And then he's going or doing kind of Ridley Scott Kubrick with the sci-fi stuff, and then where the kind of has the Hal, the mother, the Virgo kind of thing. So he plays those straight, like this is a hard sci-fi, and then over here is like you're watching, Toshiro Mifune as the Ronin, So that's what I think is the discipline that he had in terms of really portraying each one as a specific thing is why it works.
And we're into that weird part of they're using slant, chink, and just every other ethnic slur. And part of me is like, well, when I lived in New York, I used to hear this shit all the time.
Yeah.
But it doesn't age well.
Yeah, it doesn't age well. That's for sure. I mean, when I read it, I was surprised how much of it there is of it.
You don't remember it until you reread it, and I was just like, ooh, like this is a bad idea. But at the time,
yeah,
and I know everybody gets mad about that. Like, well, you're trying to ageism it. And I was like, no, like really, at the time where he wrote this was acceptable.
I don't know if it was acceptable as much as it was. He was trying to show that these are people that don't care about stuff like that. I mean, if you look at the characters, they're kind of in a war with each other, but yet they're willing to team up to achieve something,
But yet Casey McKenna is a progressive of having a African American protagonist.
Yeah. I mean, the main character is Asian, and
thinks he's Asian.
Well, yeah, but within his mind and within the portrayal, but he's also too. I think he played him like a samurai, like a dude who's like has been trained, a guy who doesn't take a lot off of people and is willing to chop you down in a minute if he thinks, and there's actually that scene in there that I thought was really interesting where the guy told him to go in there and say a specific thing inside that bar.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, they did it in Rush Hour,
Yeah.
It's kind of, it doesn't age well in either, but when he goes in and he comes out and then the guy wants to fight him and he doesn't want to fight him, he bows down to him to apologize, right? Shows you that the Ronin doesn't understand this world, and that to me is why that moment right there where they show the Ronin crying after he cuts the guy's arm off
Yes.
shows you that Miller has an understanding of what they're saying and what they're doing isn't right. So if
It's
you
also very subversive that I think McKenna is actually the hero of this book,
right.
which at the time, I don't know if people understood.
I know when I read it this time, I was surprised how involved he was.
Very much. She was very involved. The husband was way more involved than I remembered.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The husband was way more involved because as I was like, they were talking, I was like, okay, he's just kind of to show some texture. And then I was like, oh my God, he's unraveling the whole plot.
The mutants reminded me a lot of what was introduced in Dark Knight Returns, which I kept saying the seeds of Dark Knight Returns were very much in this book. I try to not remember Bad News Bears. I'm gonna be honest, but yeah, ethnic slurs were used by the kids a lot in Bad News Bears. Very much Archie Bunker style, according to Bobby Delgado, and yeah, like it's weird when you kind of space yourself apart from the art years apart, where things that didn't bother you before kind of do. Watchmen is a book I read every 2 or 3 years, and I notice things more as I get older that I didn't before. And the last time I read it, there was some stuff in it I didn't really appreciate reading, and I think that's part of getting older, and I think that's the subversive part of the art.
Yeah, though that's the thing about comic book art coming out of the 70s and coming out of the seduction of the innocent era, that a lot of these comics, especially even Grendel, for that matter, these were all books where I think people were saying, let's expand how people look at a comic book. So there are things in there that by today's standard would be like go against certain cultural norms, but at the time they were meant to be like, look, we can do this, we can show these kinds of things or say these kinds of things. So that this is a case where I feel like context is like super important, just because it tells you what the mindset was. And these were times where comic books were trying to be a little more outlaw, and that's where people went to them. They wanted something that was a little bit away from the mainstream.
Well, I found it funny that people were yearning for Milestone now, or Milestone when it came back out in 90, 91.
Mm-hmm.
There was a weird pushback against it, but now everybody's like, well, no, I want Blood Syndicate. I want Static. And it's funny that, oh God, what was the artist, the writer's name for Milestone? But at the time, like people pushed back against Milestone, and all of a sudden, 20 years later, everybody's like, well, no, we want all these Milestone characters.
I remember when Milestone first came out, I thought it was pretty, a lot of people really liked it.
It was an interesting, like, cutting edge thing. I think people wanted it, and then they started reading it, and they're like, I don't know if I want this.
What's the question here? It says the Karl, what's Jenkins?
Means complain about mainstream comics, which haven't grown up in his opinion.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because if I go to someone today and I would say, what are the greatest comic books that have come out, right? People oftentimes still say Dark Knight or Watchmen, things like that. Now some say Y the Last Man, or Walking Dead. Maybe people say that, right? But there was a period of time where there was like 25 years where nothing came out that matched those, and that shows me that the industry is not growing as much. Where when people are asked to really have to recommend something, they're recommending something that was like, man, this is like 30 something years ago,
So I think for Watchmen in particular, you have to remember what was going on. The Thatcher stuff, where they wanted prison camps for gay people. Like
That's more the V
there,
for Vendetta, I'd say.
V for Vendetta, but I mean,
I don't know if
there's
you heard, but
crazy
it got,
shit that was going on during that time during the '80s.
well, V for Vendetta got banned in Texas.
I wouldn't doubt it.
No, that was last week's news. It's true though.
Of course,
That and Why the Last Man.
and I think every book has a different meaning to different people. Like I can read Watchmen every year and pull out something new from it that maybe my brain didn't pull out 2 or 3 years ago before then.
Yeah.
There's subtext upon subtext upon subtext.
Yeah. Like, I'll give you an example. Years ago, I was going to, when it was the Chicago Comic Con, right? And you okay?
Me too, me too.
Yeah, before it was that. And I was on a plane and I decided to read Watchmen while I was going and while I was coming back because it was a really long flight. And spoiler alert, but I got to where the original Night Owl gets killed in his own apartment, surrounded by all of his trophies and things like that. And what's weird is when I read that as a kid, basically, I felt like, okay, yeah, that sucks, but it didn't really hit me. And now, kind of as an adult and reading it, I was thinking, wow, here's this guy that is literally killed by his own memories and his own sense of success. And he's in a place of safety and a place where he's sort of honoring his past achievements. And then he's murdered there. And that to me really hit me differently as an adult, you know?
I kind of sit back and wonder how Moon Knight's going to pass with people on Netflix other than Oscar Isaacs playing Mark Spector. Because this is a guy who is mentally damaged. He has PTSD. He has multiple personalities. How is the mental illness aspect going to resonate with people?
Wow, that's a really good question. I mean, I really think it's all about how they portray it in terms of, I still think there's a lot of stuff that people don't understand about mental illness, where a lot of times mental illness is looked at as a weakness within a person, when I don't think that that's the case at all. And I don't think I mean, I hope that they take it in a direction where they show the legitimacy of it and they show how somebody can handle it on a daily basis, how that they manage it, you know?
It's something I've dealt with. I have bipolar disorder, and it's weird the way people will look at you and kind of make their judgments upon you. So I'm curious how it'll affect normal people, because this is a guy with multiple personality disorder. At least if they do it the way I'm kind of hoping they do it, the Warren Ellis way, where he's wearing a suit and tie with the just pale white.
Yeah.
It's an interesting move. Good take on Watchmen, Carl. Like,
Thank
and
you.
again, Watchmen's one of the series you can pull so much from.
Yeah.
I feel like it's open to interpretation in so many ways, and I think that might be the genius of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's so amazing about Watchmen is how every individual issue is kind of a master class in a particular style of comic book storytelling. So,
And
like, for example,
if you read the scripts Dave Gibbons was given
yeah,
in full fucking form,
he's like,
like,
there's a picture to the left, and it's about this big on the thing, and it's a picture of him this doing this, hugging each. I mean, I read some of that stuff, and you're just like, wow,
guys, if you can Google it, like I remember Greg Capullo was on Kevin Smith's podcast, and he said he got a script from Alan Moore and fucking threw it in the trash when he was on Spawn. Like, it's so detailed that as an artist you'd be insulted, because I think you want a bit of freedom at your core.
Yeah, that's not Alan Moore though. Alan Moore is like panel one. It is this. It is nighttime. It is this. It is that. Is it? I mean, he really digs into it. But as a reader, they're fun to read and to see how his mind works, you know? Could I answer the one question about the V for Vendetta was banned? So
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I do not have a verification of that, but I have seen it online, and I know I saw a um, a video of it where the parents were speaking in the um, school board meeting, and then I saw the list. It's mainly graphic novels. A lot of them are LGBTQ type stories, and then the comic book ones were those were V for Vendetta and Why the Last Man. So I'm not 100% sure, but I saw the list in the article, and that's where I got it from.
Yes, Bobby, I am bipolar. I am bipolar to hypomania. It's under control, I guess you could say. I kind of know the trigger points, and I'm not embarrassed to talk about it. It's a thing that I deal with, and some days it's good, some days it's bad. Um, there's always a support system out there with your friends or support lines, and it's the holidays, and it's fucking horrible sometimes. Um, that's all I really got to say about that. Script big numbers.
Can I just say one
Um,
thing about
yeah,
that? Man, if I've never said it, I'm personally always proud of you that you're out there doing your thing, and that even this with your podcast, taking this on, um, it's awesome that you do that, dude.
thank you. It's one of the things that helps me deal with it
Yeah,
because I have anxiety disorders and getting out there. I mean, Jen and Gambit helped me with it, of course, making me go do it.
yeah, because I
Um,
remember when you first talked about it, and then your first couple episodes, but to where you are now in terms of how you've evolved it and improved it and facing those challenges, it's amazing, man.
what's interesting, Ronnie Barnes, who is doing the new Lakers Showtime series,
Hmm.
or he deals with it every day. Like he has horrible anxiety dealing with it and kind of second guessing everything. And that made me think, okay, this is a guy who's successful. He's worked with the Wayans brothers and everybody else, and he constantly has this problem he's dealing with.
Yeah,
And I think that's a positive. That's a dude who can function. And I mean, now he's doing a show about Lakers, which is fucking incredible.
yeah. But I mean that's a a uh, it's a testament to your personal strength that you put yourself out there. You know, so
I'm gonna ban books where LGBT characters are. I feel like there's too many characters out there with LGBTQ characters to ban.
nor should they ban them, in my opinion.
But for anybody out there, like if you want to notice strong LGBTQ characters, Love and Rockets by the Hernandez brothers, and then the Rocket and Icon. Um, oh my god. Jesus Christ, I can't believe I'm fucking forgetting his name. Who created Milestone?
He's
Um,
going, Dwayne McDuffie.
Dwayne McDuffie. Yes, he was one of the writers of that book, and Rocket is a LGBTQ character. Check him out.
I tell you one thing though, you and I should never be on like a comic book trivia game show. We'll get ousted in the first round, dude. We'll be like
um,
creator of Eraserhead.
thank you very much, Gore. Like, it's not something I advertise out there, but I'm not ashamed of it. Jen helped me a ton during my bad times, and Gambit forced me to do this shows because he's like, well, we got to keep up with our back catalog of trades. So we started doing the trade series. And again, we're going to be doing a George Perez show. And again, it's another creator I don't think got the love he deserves. And what he's written to his fans about, like, I only have one good eye, but I'm crying.
Yeah, that was a
And all
rough.
the love given to him. Like, never have I met a creator who's been so kind to everybody at every show.
Yeah.
You ask for a
Hmm.
sketch, $40 to the Hero Initiative. He doesn't get a dime of that. It goes to helping other creators.
Yeah, I know there was a couple shows that I was at, and people would come in, try to get in early to get in line because he would have those kind of low cost sketches. And man, a couple of them came over and showed them to me, and these look like just amazing. I mean, some of them was just like, wow, this does not look like a traditional head sketch.
It's probably going to be at the beginning of January. Again, I want to try and get some people who have love for George. Gambit, who is having dinner with George this week, which is fucking weird to say because he walked Gambit and his wife down the aisle for their wedding. He's gonna be emotional, so I want to give him a little leave time to do that. Again, Karl, you're more than welcome to join us because we're going to be talking art and Crisis. And good God, if there's no book that has ever been homaged more than Crisis covers, and George Perez is like secretly one of DC's best artists over the years.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm surprised that even at this point, over the last 10 years, why have they not just locked him down into doing just great covers, you know?
Well, he only see out one eye now.
But I mean, over the last 10 years, though, right?
I honestly don't think they respect him. And Phil Jimenez or Jimenez has made no bones about that he apes George nonstop.
Right.
And he does a great job of doing it. And he weirdly got thanked in the Wonder Woman movie. And he's like, look, I don't know why I'm in that. I'm not in there without George.
Yeah.
And George is just one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Like, I've never met, other than Todd Knock, nobody at any show I've met nicer than him.
The two people that I found really nice was Dave Cockrum. I was fortunate to have dinner with him with a group of other artists, and then Sergio Aragonis is great.
Weirdly, I'm one of the few people who had a great interaction with oh god, unfortunately he's affiliated with Comic Gate at this point. Ethan Van Scriver.
Okay. Yeah.
My friend who passed away, he was in the hospital and he was dying, and he loved Cyberfrog.
Hmm.
So I went up at the show and I was asked Ethan to do a Cyberfrog sketch, and I told him, I was like, "Oh, my friend's gonna appreciate this. He's dying," and he was like, "Don't give me money.
Wow.
Like, just take this and take it to your friend." So that was my great interaction with this person. And then I hear how wild racist this person is. I was like, well, this person did a nice thing for me, so I can't imagine that. But my friend passed away, so like forever, that's going to be my memory of
Your
Ethan.
interaction with him, yeah.
Yeah,
That's tough, man. I mean, what little I do know of the comic skate thing, it seems to me like in an industry that's always kind of embattled, it's like, wow, does the industry really need one more thing?
no,
You know? I mean, it's just where it's been an industry that struggled and created some amazing pieces of artwork, and yet there's this whole other side thing happening that's just I wish wasn't there, you know?
Perez's ran. Oh my god, Perez's cover of Kara being held by Superman.
Yeah.
There's no better cover out there. I really, it's been homaged so many times.
I often wonder if George Perez had I think who was his inker for a long time? Romeo Tanghal?
It might have been, at least for a good point of the Titan stuff.
But I wonder if he would have had. I mean, I know there's been certain times where someone like Terry Austin has inked him, but I wonder if he would have had like a kind of that run with an inker that, you know,
Well, if you had a Scott Williams,
yeah, or that kind of thing, or his Klaus Janson, um, someone where they could have come in and really emulated his style a little bit more.
I don't think there was ever anybody who accentuated his work perfectly.
Yeah, this is
I
true.
mean, but even then, like his stuff stands the test of time. Like even his Judas contract stuff is so for that time ahead of its time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he was also a really good storyteller, you know?
Oh, 100%. My friend Gambit, he actually did his portfolio, and that was his big thing. He's like, I like everything, but your storytelling needs work.
Mm,
And that was his big thing for everything. Like, hey, your storytelling needs to be on point.
yeah.
Which I think any creator needs to hear that because your pacing, your storytelling, I think makes your story.
Yeah, I mean, it is the key element of your work.
But I think that's the illustrator versus cartoonist argument you can make. The
Yeah, man.
illustrator lost time, your
You
cartoonist makes it go.
Yeah, I mean, you just nailed it right there, dude. That to me is the biggest over the last 30 years. I think that's probably been the biggest thing that is uh, been the determining factor with comics is before it was more focused on storytelling and making a very clear story and getting it across. And in fact, think about when you go back to those issues in the 70s and early 80s, you're paying 99 cents, you're paying 75 cents, 60 cents. And then at the highest point, I think it was $1.50. And you were getting a lot of story for that because the storytelling was more compressed and it just was a completely different vibe. And then as it became more illustrative and this kind of influence of the decompressed storytelling and people opening up the books to these splash pages, which Ronin, back to Ronin, really influenced that a little.
Yeah. I'm
But he had,
sorry, everybody. This has become an art show, and honestly, I think Frank would rather have it that way.
so yeah, to your point, I think he really brought in the illustration element of of that to comics, where you were seeing those big shots and sort of stuff where you look at that page for a long time. I mean, there's a shot in that issue of Ronin where he goes, "You've seen Aquarius do this. Now see how Aquarius prepares for war." And they look out this window, and it's just all these robots flying out in these weird, funky speeder bike looking things. And
The
I just
splash
stared at
page,
that.
the splash page to end it to make your assumption
Mhm.
was fucking unheard of for that time.
Yeah, that it folded out.
You would never fucking do that,
Yeah, I mean, the image guys tried it at different times. Um,
but never to that extreme of that was your ending.
yeah, and it's not a shot. What's interesting about that is that it's not a shot of a bunch of superheroes flying out. It's a
No.
shot of an explosion. You
And
know?
then the final scene where you, like the thing, draw your own conclusion.
Yeah, it's like it's almost like the Death Star blowing up, and then you turn the page over, and there's that moment of which this is a really super obscure reference, but I'm just going to mention it anyways. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Armageddon.
Yes.
It's okay. It really reminded me, the last half of that book really reminded me a lot of Armageddon in terms of the tonality and some of the lighting choices. But that explosion at the end and the final flipped out part, or the gatefold, I guess you'd say it is. But when that opened up and you see that, and then you see a close up of Casey's face, and then the final image, um, that just that mood is really interesting for a comic. You
Well,
know?
this was also the one conspiracy theory I seen that said that this was Frank's message towards create her own comics. or work for hire, they basically said, well, this is saying that everything stayed the same, that it was just the Ronin and Casey. And I was like, yeah, but no, I don't think that was the point of this whole book. I don't think Frank was that forward thinking.
I don't know. I mean, I felt like that there was definitely these overtones of like, um,
Oppressors.
you've been bullied, and now you have this power fantasy, and now you're extending that power fantasy onto other people. And then I mean, because at the end it was almost like she had used the kid to had manipulated the kid. Virgo had manipulated the kid to by using his abusive past, that he'd been abused as a kid, or not to, because he was still kind of a kid. But then when you have this thing come out where it's like he is now, when you look at that last page, to me, my interpretation of it is he's now the Ronin. Like the only thing that survived that was the
Was
family.
the Ronin.
Yeah, and that's all that's left. And that to me was pretty powerful. Because in
That's
some
what I
ways,
took it as, is that all that was left was the Ronin and Casey, and they were almost like an Adam and Eve.
yeah, but I also felt like Casey was contributing to his fantasy. And at one
Yes.
point, her beliefs were also being integrated. That's why I think she began to see some of the things that the Ronin saw, because she was an active participant in the fantasy through her.
She believed.
Yeah. And then at the end, when she sees him, that look on her face right before they do the shot of the Ronin standing there makes you think, well, you know what? Maybe this is his dream come true and this is your dream come true.
So
And
I talked about the Shyamalan twist of it, and it
yeah,
turns out that the thinking AI knew that he had these powers and can warp reality,
yeah,
and he makes himself the Ronin. And Casey's husband figures it out, that the
right.
machine's been covering for him. And it's a very interesting take. I don't know if it works for everyone, but the Shyamalan bit of it hit me where I was like, oh, this is Shyamalan before Shyamalan.
Yeah, it had a little bit of a Twilight Zone-ish kind of thing.
Yeah, it was interesting. And the machine even still covering for him near the end, where it almost was like it was genuinely in love with him.
Yeah, I felt like that the machine thought this kid is the key to me actually gaining life. And so I have to protect him at all costs, almost like a motherly figure, right? In fact, he almost relates to her that way and calls her that. So
Yes.
the AI was willing to go to any lengths in order to maintain the fantasy and to maintain his life. So when this happened, she was even to the bitter end trying to control him until, obviously he exploded.
Gore, yes. 100% Frank Miller subverted fandom with that whole scene. Thinking Bruce is dead. And then the heart beating.
Yeah. There's sometimes there are some things out there that I think were just perfect the way they were and they didn't need a sequel. Dark Knight is one of those. I don't feel Dark Knight ever needed a sequel.
Dark Knight Return, the whatever that fucking sequel was that he put out,
Yeah, I
which is
read it.
getting a new appreciation. I don't think it needed to be out there.
I mean, it wasn't the worst thing I've ever read. I mean, it was entertaining and all that. But that ending of Dark Knight where he's like, it'll be a good life. It's like, that's Michael Jordan hitting the shot against Utah, right? I'm like, it's
The
enough.
sickness game.
Yeah. I'm like, it's good. This is good. This is enough. Or it's like the first Matrix movie. The first Matrix movie has kind of an ending where you're just like, I learned everything. It was cool. It was a great journey. We don't really need to see more, you know? Yeah,
Are
death.
you excited about that new movie at all? Like, I'm in a weird place with it.
Before I answer that, can I answer one of the questions?
Yes.
It says, I think death and rebirth is a theme for Miller. Man, absolutely. Man, that is and even the religious overtones, whether it be in Elektra coming back to life, whether it be Matt Murdock
Superman Dune
transition.
figure.
Yeah,
Superman's a Christ figure.
yeah. Daredevil in the Mazzucchelli issues, where he sort of goes to the bottom and comes back up. Batman in Dark Knight, there's an element of that. I mean, also in Sin City, where God, what's his name? The photographer in
Oh,
Name to Kill For.
fuck.
See,
Mazzucchelli, another
we should never,
art
we should never do
creator.
a game show. You and I.
Mazzucchelli, another creator who kind of is slept on a little bit as a collaborator.
Well, I mean, those two.
His greatest works are with Daredevil and Batman.
Right. Well, him and Miller to me are like the perfect match, right? Like,
There's a synergy.
yeah. I mean, Mazzucchelli to me, he brings Miller's story to life as if it was Miller,
I
and
mean,
in
the
some
same thing
ways,
with Byrne Claremont. I, as much as they dislike each other,
yeah.
there's a weird synergy with their work where they corrected each other.
Right, or they fill in the gaps. Like when they interface,
Yeah.
something happens. It creates almost like a third creator, which is what I always think of when I think of a good inker over a particular artist. They make a third artist, which is like, for example, when you see Miller by himself or Klaus Janson by himself, but when it's Miller and Klaus Janson, it's you see elements, but it's still something different.
Well, Jim Lee, Scott Williams, like if you don't see them together, it's weird.
Yeah, but I think Scott can, for example, when he inked Wills on all those Punisher issues and stuff, they had a synergy too. You know,
There's also Jason Fabok, who weirdly got who got Scott Williams to start inking him out of the blue on the
oh yeah,
Justice League.
is that recently?
That was Dark Side War at the end of New 52. Scott Williams all of a sudden started inking him, and it was like, oh, okay, this is something new.
I'd like to go. I'd like to see those.
It didn't happen very long, but it was just like, oh, I mean, so apparently what happened was Fabok, his digital files that he inked himself, accidentally got erased. So they're
Mm.
running behind. So they got Scott Williams to ink his last couple of issues.
Wow, man.
And again,
That's
he's kind of like a weird bastardization of Finch and Lee. So the inks kind of worked very well with him. I know no one wants to hear bastardization.
It's switch bastardization to fusion or something.
Yeah, like it's a weird thing where like you notice the styles as soon as you see them. And it's the first thing that comes to my mind is, all right, well, you took these two styles, like kind of like a Ronin, where in Asian cinema you would take like ninjutsu and samurai styles and put them together. Where it just happens to kind of work.
Yeah, I think that the thing about that Miller does though, it's like he takes an influence and he runs it through the Millerverse. And then it's like his take on that. Where I think some people kind of go, "Oh, I've seen how this particular artist solves something, and then I'm going to use a similar style of solution in my work." And that's where you see those sort of stylistic characteristics come through. With Miller, it's very rare that you say, "Well, Miller looks just like this." But when you see people who emulate him, it's obvious right away because his stuff's so distinct and uniquely him.
Miller did do some Spider-Man work. I also weirdly I bought all the variants that Mobius did of his for one of the Spider-Man anniversary issues before it went to one of the last editions. Mobius did a with trade dress and without trade dress version, and I bought both. And Mobius, again, another creator who has a distinct style, which I could almost say that Miller is biting on it sometimes.
In this book, yeah. But it's interesting because I think a lot of people looked at what Miller did as emulating Mobius, and you'd see other people kind of do that later on. But I would even go so far as say Mobius has like three different unique styles.
Very much so. Mobius, I will say the storytelling is always great with Mobius's work,
Yeah,
but it's also very cinematic,
yeah,
where it's
everything you look at,
distinctive. When you see it, you know it.
yeah, has a very
The
story.
Inkle in particular stands out like profoundly.
Yeah, but I mean, he has like Blueberry, which is like one style. There's his sort of line art style, and of course his painted look. So yeah, he's got at least three of them. You back up? Can you hear you? Can you hear me? Hopefully he's back. Are you
Yeah,
back?
it's doing weird shit. Okay, I'm back. I just had to change my headphones. My ear pods ran out of time. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so people who are Dune fans, you might have watched Jodorowsky's Dune, and Mobius did a giant Bible for it,
Yeah.
which now they've put out for auction.
You know what's interesting to me about Dune is that if you go back and look at the Lynch movie, I find that entertaining. And then you watch Jodorowsky's Dune, and I actually found that even more entertaining. And then the Villanueva Dune, I was like, wow, it's only getting better. you know? In terms of Dune stuff, it's like it's funny to me, just as pure entertainment. Just looking at like I took 2 hours of my life and watched something. It's just it's all three of those have interesting things to watch.
It's weird to me that like we started out of a joke doing a Dune show, and it's my most popular fucking show on this goddamn channel.
Hmm.
And it bothers the shit out of me because I put out so much other shit, and all of a sudden Dune got popular. And it's weird, but at the same time, I'm happy about it because I love Dune and all of the weird, like, counterculture stuff of it.
Yeah, I mean, with Dune, timing is everything, right? Because like if someone had mentioned Dune 5 years ago, people would been like, "What? Who cares?" You know.
Yeah,
So it's like it's kind of that's why I think a lot of people who do streaming stuff really try to pick like what's the issue of the week and go in on that, and that makes sense. You want to be topical, but to me, Dune is one of those things that can be so deeply explored. You know, like you could spend episode after episode. How many episodes have you done on Dune?
we are on the third book right now. I'd say we're at 12 episodes.
Wow. Well, that could also be it that you specifically did episodes on a particular subject and drilled down on it.
The first book took us 12 episodes. The second book took us 4. This one's probably going to take us 4.
Hmm. Why do you think the first one took so long?
It was a big book.
Oh, well, there you go.
But we've been doing about 100 pages each one. And the
Do you
original
read
Dune
it?
was.
Do you read the book out loud?
we go over pieces of the chapters that
Mhm.
interest us. There's certain elements of it that are fascinating, and then other ones that were like, was Frank Herbert ahead of his time, or what was the thinking behind this? Because there's weird elements of every one of them. And I find that interesting too, of like, where was the person at? And this is a guy who was kind of a hippie.
Yeah, I get that same way about PKD, and all the books he's written, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and all that. Like, I often think, people have said that he was heavily medicated, you read different things. But a lot of those writers, I think in the 60s that were doing sci-fi, they were doing a lot of wild, interesting stuff.
Yeah, like this was a guy who was a failed newspaper writer
Right.
that got into ecology and started talking about the dunes in fucking Portland.
Right.
And it became this series. And like, even the prequels of the little writing in the beginning of the books, his son talks about how disappointed he was in his dad until Children of Dune came out, and he was actually a very popular sci-fi writer at that time because he sold over 1 million books.
Mhm.
It's very interesting, and this is one of those weird books that very much the time it was written plays very hard into it.
Yeah.
Also, like, weirdly, Frank Herbert talked a lot about office furniture.
Really.
Like, a lot. Filing cabinets in the first book. The second book, it was about tile on the floor.
Huh.
And maybe it's because we're drunk reading it. I don't know, but it really, like, resonated with us.
I mean, I haven't read the first Dune book since maybe high school, so I don't remember all of everything, but I do remember, there's quite a bit of imagery to it, so I can see why it attracts a lot of people that have strong visual sense.
Well, the one we're reading now, it's basically about the youngest Atreides going, "Should I fuck my sister? I don't know. Keep the bloodline pure." And I was like, "Wait, what?"
It was the 60s, man. People were
Yeah, like, and again, like, the series is fascinating, like, to it in general. Just, I think there's always at least a line or two every book where I stop and I start pondering.
Hmm.
So there's a little bit of genius to the writing, and there's a little bit of tropey attitude towards it.
Well, I often think that Dune kind of falls into that John Carter from Mars category, where so many people have ripped off from John Carter of Mars that when you actually read it, or when that movie came out, it's like, oh, this is such a ripoff, has so many tropes. And it's like, well, it's been, copied to death. And same thing with Dune. There's elements of Dune and that obviously have influenced people, you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Fifth Element was very much influenced by this. The Ankle,
Star Wars.
yes, Star Wars, Alien.
Yeah.
If you ever watched the Jodorowsky's Dune, you'll learn about Dan O'Bannon being kidnapped,
Yeah.
basically, who eventually made Alien.
Yeah, I mean, Jodorowsky put together Ridley Scott's dream team, man.
Pretty much, pretty
Yeah.
much. And it makes me wonder about, is this a book that will ever get made?
Like the third book of Dune or Ronin?
Ronin, is there ever anybody who's going to want to make a futuristic samurai book?
Um,
Does anybody want to pay Frank Miller?
I think that this would make a great movie, you know?
If
And
not a movie, I think a 4-part Netflix series or Hulu.
yeah, okay, let me rephrase that. I think you're absolutely right. I think it would be much better as a series because this needs some time to get some of the
It
ideas.
needs to breathe.
Yeah. When I was reading it, have you watched the show Warrior?
No, I don't think I have.
Yeah, it's a really great show. It's based off a concept that Bruce Lee had, and it's about kind of during a little bit after the Old West, and how a Asian immigrant comes to America and gets involved with the Chinese triads and all that. And the actor who plays him, he actually played Storm Shadow in the last GI Joe movie, and he's got great martial arts skills. He's cool looking dude. He looks like he could definitely be that role. I think he would be perfect for it.
I think 4 hours probably would be the perfect time frame.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It really depends on how much you want to stretch it out, because there is quite a bit of intrigue in it. It's just how deep do you want to go into it?
Gore brings up a good point. The Green Knight that came out recently
Uh huh.
was a fantastic movie. Of course, A24, where they're willing to take the time and stretch it out to the artist's needs.
So a lot of people told me about the Green Knight, that it's visually stunning, but
Yes,
it's difficult to understand. Is this
I
true?
think you have to have a basic understanding of the Galahad story.
Mm-hmm. So that
Again, visually, a great movie to watch. If you have no basic understanding of it, not a great watch.
the actor that I was saying from Warrior, his name is Andrew Koji, and yeah, I think he would be perfect for Ronin if they were casting it.
Um, I'm trying to think who that is now. Did I watch Snake Eyes? I watched every other GI Joe movie, but I don't remember if I watched that one.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for GI Joe. I'll watch all GI Joe stuff.
I'm actually a huge fan, and weirdly, Larry Hama is one of those guys I think is another guy in the comic industry that maybe doesn't get the respect he deserves because he had to handle a lot of shit of licensed properties.
Yeah, and he did a great job building out those backstories.
Also, he famously was the one who told Greg Capullo he was not ready for prime time.
Did he really?
Yes. Made him come back 8 times.
Wow.
And then put him on Quasar.
I liked his Quasar stuff.
Yeah, I did too. But like Greg Capullo was like, Larry Hama was my mortal enemy. But he also said, I'm ready for Barry Windsor Smith's job. But I mean, Barry Windsor Smith's a complete different animal when you look at fantasy books.
Oh yeah,
his Conan stuff, even Weapon X, Marvel Comics Presents was just next level.
Yeah, my favorite job. Well, I mean, I love all those random X-Men issues he did in the '80s, but the Machine Man miniseries.
Yes,
Love
shit, that was great. Another one where completely underappreciated and under the radar.
Oh, Machine Man?
Yeah.
Yeah. That thing was great.
And then they tried to bring Machine Man back later, and it never hit.
Yeah.
But again, if you're not going to have that artist there with that creator, it's just not going to hit.
Something that was mentioned in the chat earlier was about how the kind of intimate scenes that are in Ronin are done pretty tastefully, and they have a little. He did a great job making them sort of poetic, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, there was basically like, I'm gonna take your gi down around your shoulders, and then we're gonna stop.
Yeah. I recently saw a photo, like within the last week, that showed Miller in his studio while he was working on Ronin.
Amanda Connor was one of his assistants.
I did not know that.
During Electric Assassin. Machine Man would make a great movie and/or series.
Yeah, it would, especially with Iron Man in it and all that.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I don't know how it would hold up, but definitely I'd be curious to see what it would be. I still have not read Barry Windsor Smith's Monsters.
I haven't either, but I definitely want to get it. Maybe that will be my Christmas gift to myself.
My co-host Jen said that she loved it so far, but it was a very big book. Which for her is pretty impressive because she's usually kind of against me on everything. So to get to the end of this book, there is a lot of splash pages.
Yeah.
In particular, like just destruction.
Yeah. But I felt that was good because it felt like you were, every time he went back to that shot, you were like this, like closer, 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 closer. So you got a better, it was overwhelming it.
McKenna goes and starts investigating more, and she's helping Ronin destroy the enemies. And they're basically robots at this point. We're going what they're seeing versus reality, I guess would be the easiest way to say it.
So one of the things that I was kind of taken aback by when I was seeing the robots is how much they look like the Boston Dynamic robots you see nowadays.
Yes.
And I was like, wow, man, he was hitting onto this like 83, 84, and now look at it.
So at the end of it, it's basically McKenna's basically knows what's going on, and she's telling him, kill yourself. You need to commit seppuku. Run that sword upside yourself.
I almost felt like that was her forcing him to face reality.
Basically, that's kind of what I thought. Some of the futuristic pages are not the best art, but I think that's his take on what he thought it would look like.
Yeah, like outside of New York, in outside of Aquarius and all that, it was like it felt like John Carpenter's Escape from New York. Just like 1970s rundown New York. That kind of look.
And the whole time, like, he thinks he's fighting a demon that is his own kind of imagination. And then we get to these spread pages.
Yeah.
Which for this point in time was not normal.
No. And then like I said, he didn't use it on a bunch of superheroes flying out or a big fight scene. He used it on an explosion.
Yeah. And when you get to it, this is what you were forced to interpretate.
Yeah.
That's the last page of the book. So you have to figure out, is this what's left? Is this their mentality? What is it? And that's why I compare it to The Thing.
Well, if you open it up and show the panels that lead up to that shot, like the flip side of the open section.
Where even that does not give you a great...
Well, I think it's like she sort of is almost teleported out, or if you flip it around. No, like you flip it all the way around.
Oh.
Yeah. So you see just like where she almost is now been sort of teleported out of it. That's what I always thought, because there's a huge explosion. And then it feels to me like everything blew up and then this energy exists and then he comes out of that. So I think that's his power manifesting. And
I kind of thought that was his real version of what he considered himself.
Yeah.
And that's what she was in love with.
Yeah. And I think that's why I felt like in a way it was like a he humanized his version of himself and humanized like his best version of himself. And then he's also presented himself as like, I'm this character that you fell in love with. So it's kind of her fantasy and his fantasy sort of melding.
It could be. I always admire when you leave an ending to an interpretation.
Yeah.
The Thing is one of my favorite movies that is up for interpretation. The also Christopher Nolan movie, Inception,
Yeah.
another one that is up for interpretation at the ending.
Surprisingly, though, I've met quite a few people that find movies like that. They hate that. They hate that feeling. But me, I always love when the lights come back on or you turn the final page and it's kind of like, oh, cool. I have something to take away with me, something to think about, you know?
There's enough meat on the bone where you can be like, okay, I could see how this could end, but this is how I want it to end.
Right. It's like in Lost in Translation, where
Yes.
Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson and there's that kind of conversation that's between them, which is
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's either the best thing or it's the worst thing, and you don't really know because it's between those two characters.
yeah. And I think that's a fun way to end a story because it's a way to interact with the reader or the viewer that's very personal, and it's up to them to kind of bring their own thought process and feelings to it.
We've somehow almost made it to 3 hours on this.
Did we?
Yes. Um, Tennis like closure and stories. I think there's something to be said about closure because you can kind of just close the book on that story and just say you're done. But I understand wanting that open-ended feeling to it of
Like in, for example, like in at the end of Last Crusade, Indiana Jones' Last Crusade, and you literally see them right off into the sunset. Like for me, I was like, I'm good. Like I don't have to see another Indiana Jones movie. But yet, man, as soon as Crystal Skull came out, I was there at midnight, ready to nuke the fridge and everything. You know. That being said, I think they could have ended it on Last Crusade, and that would have been fine. You know.
I was like that with actually the original thing because the nihilistic ending of the end of it's just like giving in,
Yeah. Well,
where it's like, well, if anything's gonna happen, I'm in no shape to deal with it. So
yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, the thing though is, man, it's brilliant on so many levels as a movie, you know, but that ending of it, it's about um interpretation and to a certain level, I think trust. Like, does he believe him?
paranoia.
Yeah, it takes it to the core of what the whole thing was about. Like, can you trust these people? Does this isolation make you different? You know, it's like they're almost aliens to that part of our world because they're isolated and, you know,
Same
so
with Inception, where like the top spinning and is it teetering or is it not? Like you got to make the decision. Is it gonna be the good ending or the bad ending?
yeah, however you want to see it, however you want to
Yeah,
perceive it.
and I
But
kind of appreciate that. And people hate it, but like I like that artistic take on it of you make of it what you want.
yeah, it's almost like it has an awareness, like it knows you're watching and it knows it did a good job of getting you to this place. So now, hey, now it's your chance to kind of get involved. You know, you finish it. And that's Inception is particularly um, pronounced because it's literally they're planning the thing in your mind. So you're
Yeah.
playing the Inception literally. It's almost like they turn the movie into the plot. I mean, turn your interpretation of the movie into the plot.
So I think we've spent almost 3 hours on this. Thank you everybody for joining us on this. I don't know if we've answered questions, but we've talked about a lot of everything. We might be back for the George Perez episode. I know the George Perez episode is going to happen in the beginning of January. Again, thank you for everybody. Leave comments about what you think of this book, or hit us up on Instagram at Comic Karl, at comic_chop_news, and we will try to answer your questions as we see fit. All the information is in the description. And enjoy your holiday.
Can I mention something? Can I mention something? Just this coming weekend, I'm going to be at Comic-Con Revolution in Ontario, California. So feel free to come out there and see me. I'll have prints and art, and I'll be signing any old blood strikes you have.
What about Prophet? I've heard that Prophet's coming back.
Yeah, it's coming back. And I did the Bloodstrike Prophet crossover. So if you bring those, I will happily sign them.
Go check out Talk to Karl. He's always great at the shows. That's actually how I met him back when he was doing Hyperworks, Deity, and Saint Angel, and other stuff. Always a great show and great person to talk to about comic history.
Well, thanks for having me, Dan. I appreciate it.
Oh no, like I appreciate you coming on. Like this was one of those weird, like one-off things where I was like, man, I haven't talked about Ronin, and you were like, I haven't talked about Ronin. I want to talk about Ronin.
Well,
Frank is so, I want to say hot button, but he's done and said some things in the past that triggers people, and I don't think people understand what he's done for the industry as a whole, because it's just they choose to look at what they want to look at.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about both. Talk about his legacy, but then also talk about where there might be issues with it, because I think that's how you grow from it.
Neil Adams is another character where he did a lot for creator rights, and like owning your original art. And if you've had interactions with him at shows, you've probably seen a different Neil Adams, but there's a reason why you got there.
He's always been really nice to me, and I appreciate that. But I have seen some things.
Yeah, I saw him shake down a little kid, which kind of rattled me a little bit.
Well, we'll talk about that some other time.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you everybody, and go ahead, follow Karl. If you're at Comic Revolution Ontario, go over and check him out and have a talk with him about comics, and tell him you watched the show. So thank you everybody, and good night.